Hey, did you hear? Santa Claus isn't real. What? Whatever. I believe in Santa. Everybody knows Santa is real. Quit messing with me. That's not cool. It's gotta be true. They're probably messing with me. I want it to be true. It's gotta be true. They're just crazy. I believed it to be true. I believed it to be true. It's true, right? It's true, right? Could it not be true? Could I have been misled? Oh my. Welcome to the Adult Santa Claus Effect. Hello again from the Westport Studios here in the heart of Kansas City. Welcome back to the Adult Santa Claus Effect, where we talk about why we believe what we believe when it's getting challenged and confronting that which we may have been misled on and do not know all there is to know on certain topics. And boy, is that going to get challenged more today than ever. So in episode 1, we talked about the flow of information, the news, how it's controlled, how it's funded, scripted by just a few, the origins of conspiracy theory, how you're getting curated and told how to perceive things from a small group of people running the show. In episode 2, I basically just talked about my story, my experiences, how much I've seeked out knowledge in my life. I've always felt the need to seek truth, different perspectives, how much I've been blessed, humbly living out an exciting life, and my journey of wellness, and how much of my life has been dedicated towards wellness, including pursuing and obtaining a certification in nutrition coaching, and how I lived this incredible life journey and gave it all for a cause that I believed in. Say what you want about making that decision, but I gave all of my life to provide as many people as possible as education and services rooted in natural health, non-toxic, chemical-free, whole-body, holistic transformation. So how cool is that? How many of you can respect believing in a cause and staying determined towards something so much, knowing that if it doesn't work out, that you'll lose so much of your life, huh? So yeah, that episode 2, was a tough one to record for me for a lot of reasons that I spoke about previously in that episode. And I mentioned how I was looking forward to that one the least, yet I am looking forward to this one today the most, and diving into some Adult Santa Claus Effect moments. Again, we're going to be confronting many of them today. So if you feel you didn't get enough in episode 1, probably didn't get enough in episode 2, buckle up today. And remember, what we're confronting the most here on this episode, and really a lot with the whole podcast mini-series, is fear. Remember, anything based in fear or division, anything that creates dependency or loss of liberty, or anything to do with an invisible enemy, in my mind, deserves skepticism. I'm skeptical of it, as it often seems to be counterproductive to my optimal health and the health of the community in which I live in a lot of different ways. And fear, specifically as it relates to health and wellness, is used to drive the modern medical system so much. And in fact, most of the modern day system of life that we live. Let's list off some of the fears that go around so often. Fear of viruses, right? Even now, a fear of measles. We talked about fears of invisible enemies from terrorists. That's been used heavily over the last 30 years. Fear of cholesterol, fear of salt, fear and distrust of our body's natural strength and ability to work through most all of Earth's terrain can throw at us. Fear of the sun, fear of the power of weather patterns, all the way to fear of Russia, right? Or fear of DJT or other politicians, fear of talking about politics or religion with friends or family members. Fear of litigation, right, and getting sued, or fear of the IRS or any local state or federal agency for the dozens of taxes that may not get paid or you're stressing about paying. all those that are being pushed on our lives, which in the context of taxes, we're going to be talking a lot more about those in the next episode on business and politics. More fear of public shame. Man, during the height of the pandemic a couple years ago, many people wore face masks not because they believed in them, but solely because they were scared of getting publicly shamed and standing out from the crowd. This fear, just fear in general, drives everything, including a massive industry of insurance companies for anything that we fear about, right? And even how about fear of commitment? How much that goes around, especially these days. Or fear of missing out, FOMO, right? And hey, I am guilty of that last one. I have a bad case of FOMO. At least I used to have a major case of it. I'm getting better. I'm getting better at it. But I love living life and experiencing everything there is to do with life without regrets. But fear keeps us from going through these adult Santa Claus effect moments. And we've been talking about strength and resiliency a lot and being sovereign over our own thoughts and beliefs. So it's with that strength and resiliency and a rejection of fear and dependency that we produce this episode on health and wellness, titled Wellness Without Complexity. So what we're going to do today is not trying to confuse you, we're not trying to overload you, or we're not even trying to change you. It's about bringing out the best in you. I got to say, I'm sorry it took me a moment to record this episode from the last one. A lot of life things happening, but also took a family trip down to Houston and really just put so much time into prepping for the delivery of this episode, as I consider it one of my most important professional highlights and personal milestones of my life. So I don't care how long this one goes. This information is worth it. It is such a privilege and honor to finally present much of what I've learned over the years. And so today we're going to discuss the body, which touches on 3 of the 7 pillars of my wellness coaching program: mindfulness, physical, nutritional, but just how incredible the body is. We're going to talk about big pharma, the big food and big ag industries, and how those systems work. We're going to provide more information, not misinformation, more information on health topics of fat or cholesterol or salt, sunblock versus sunscreen, electricity, fluoride, even plant medicine. Then we're going to get into COVID, viruses, and vaccines, which I'm going to call injections a lot during this podcast. And there's going to be some heavy stuff in there, but it's really important stuff that we can't forget or brush off or try to sweep under the rug. But I really wanted to kind of leave that towards the end because some of you may not be ready for that quite yet. And it's just really heavy stuff. We go through a lot there, but it must be covered in a podcast episode on health and wellness. So we'll do that. And then at the end, the most powerful and super secret, at least until today, top 10 easiest and least amount of effort or cost pathways to optimal health. These are ones that I have created from what I have found to remove the complexity of people's perception that it's really going to be difficult and change their life to get healthy. And I will share 10 ways that you can do it in a very simplified way without a lot of extra money or without a lot of overextending effort into your existing lifestyle. So let's go. First off, before we get into the incredible powers of the body, let me start off by saying how I curate and plan each of these episodes in detail. You probably know that. And I think it's important that anyone who does podcasts has some sort of structure to how they're going to deliver it and what they're going to say. One of the reasons I didn't really like episode 2, because I felt it was a little bit too scripted, and I tried to get through it quickly because I didn't want it to go long, and I hate talking about myself. But it's important that, especially when it comes to health and wellness, that I say what needs to be said here the right way and with the right information. But it's also important that I'm genuine. So I'm going to try to be more genuine during this episode. Lay it all out there, not beat around the bush, just truck on through what can be uncomfortable truths on familiar topics, like it was when we found out Santa Claus wasn't real when we were young. And we don't want to believe deceitful things can be disguised within a good appearance, but that doesn't change the truth that they sometimes are disguised exactly that way. We don't want to believe that rich and powerful people conspire to further their greed and lust for power and control, even though we all know deep down that humans have been doing exactly that since the beginning of time. It is sad to think about that. It really is. Just like it's sad to think Santa Claus isn't real. That truth hurt. Sometimes in life, arguably many times in life, the truth hurts. And we get confused by it. We get angry and sad about it. We work through all these difficult emotional stages as part of that process of going through the Santa Claus effect until we finally acknowledge and accept it. And then we're convicted in life to move forward stronger, and we're ultimately glad to know the truth. Secondly, I need to start off here, especially being a health and wellness podcast, with a disclaimer, as well as just really a clear foundational message for this episode, that throughout everything we cover, remember a few things. Number one, you should always talk to your team of doctors about health issues that affect you or those that you love. I especially say team of doctors, not just one. Find some time to pursue second opinions and do research on your own. Seek out what feels like authentic information and peer-reviewed studies. Mindfully consider the info and options, and then decide for yourself what most aligns with your ingrained moral compass and super powerful internal intuition. Number two, we live in a world right now where we are often told our naturally born bodies are deficient and need magic pills or magic solutions to survive. In the first episode, we talked a lot about how what's going on right now is a battle for our mind. And in the world of wellness, if you can master mindfulness, the practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state of complete awareness of, your own sovereign thoughts, you're going to manage your life more skillfully. You're going to create an optimal atmosphere of productivity within your life. So it is significantly important from a wellness standpoint to not fear. Stay calm as you assess risk-benefit ratio, as you're talking to these doctors, as you're doing your research, faced with a health issue. And, let's face it, 100 times a day we assess risk, whether it be consciously or subconsciously, especially if we drive a lot. I mean, think about changing lanes and pulling in front of somebody, parking, everything. Anytime you're away and doing something significant to your body, always stay calm and do what we talked about in number one. And if you still feel, after you do all of that research and talk to your team of doctors, that the risk-benefit ratio shows that you must take that magic pill or that magic shot or injection or that magic solution, hey, then go for it. Go for it. You have free will, individual liberty, and most important, personal accountability over your body. Either way, just don't live a life in fear, all right? If nothing else, because of how harmful it is to the immune system. Respect there. Number three, guiding principle in this podcast episode and really throughout the series, unity. We all want to get healthier, right? We all want clear information that we can process in ways that are not complex or overwhelming. That's all we're trying to do here. And generally, people get united through common sense perspectives. So that's one of my goals here. So as we go through this, just openly explore these observations, perspectives, and studies with curiosity. Don't be fearful of them. Just consider them. Number four, I am not a doctor. All right. I am not an MD. I'm not a doctor. I haven't gone through med school. Therefore, nothing in this episode is intended to imply that I am diagnosing you or treating you or curing you of any illness. I am providing you a vast yet concentrated amount of information so you can become empowered as you lead your own standard of care. You should be totally in charge and be the leader in your own standard of care. While I did recently obtain certification as a nutrition coach, 800-page textbook, took me multiple months. It was the real deal. I was thoroughly impressed with that program. While I did do that, most of my experience comes from 15 plus years of being in the wellness industry, from running major wellness programs at a very large healthcare IT business line, to founding and operating my own wellness center that I talked about in the intro, about giving everything I had to constantly being surrounded by doctors of all types, health coaches, naturopaths, homeopaths, and health professionals, spanning all areas of the wellness industry. All right. And I love vast perspectives. That's what excites me the most is hearing from most people. That's what truth seeking is all about, right? Is hearing more than just one side of the story. And I really listened to them. I really learned from them. I took everything they had to say and really digested it. I also have talked a lot to local farmers and engaged in the local food system and organizations that advocate for them. I've been a living lab of my own for, 8 years now of just living local to see if it can be done. to live fresh, organic, local, to support just my local community and local food systems. So, that's where all my experience comes from, is all these other areas. So I relentlessly do my own research until really I can be at peace knowing that I can back up my convictions and conversations with data and common sense. When I talk to people, I want to be able to know that I can step through my reasoning with substance, that I'm not just regurgitating talking points or headlines. Lastly, disclaimer number 5, I have gathered a lot of data here, and I'm going to present a lot of it here in this episode. And I'm presenting it in a sequence that I feel makes it the easiest to comprehend. So I only ask for your respect in that aspect, all right? That I have done a lot of research and I'm putting a lot of data here together, all right? You're entitled to your own opinion of what I say, of course, and you can choose to do with the data whatever you want. It's up to you. And due to the depth of information, this episode is going to be the first one where I'm going to put a table of contents in the show notes so you can know the minutes that certain sections start and just go directly to those sections or those topics if you want. So please utilize that however you like. All right, beyond all that, where we are going to start is how absolutely incredible the human body is. I mean, incredible. That nutrition certification, textbooks, videos, taught me that, reinforced that. Hey, anyone who saw that Bodies touring exhibit that came through several years ago, it might still be going on. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it in a while. I was lucky to see it, I think in New York City, actually. We can attest to that. That just did a phenomenal job of showing how our bodies are supremely designed and intelligent. It is said that we are built from the smallest of terrestrial spare parts, constructed meticulously and intelligently into the most complex beings on our planet. A mixture of 84 minerals, 23 elements on the periodic table, including gold, 8 liters of water, all distributed throughout 38 trillion cells in our body. Not million, not billion, trillion cells, 38 trillion cells. We also are not static beings, really, nor is anything in this universe. Because when you get down to the smallest of molecular levels, we are protons and electrons and neutrons constantly vibrating in motion, right? Which is why there's a lot to be said about frequency and the power of frequency. And Tesla sure spoke a lot about that, Nikola Tesla, and his studies and findings. But hey, our bodies are remarkably resilient, supremely intelligent, remarkably resilient. They have evolved over many, many, many years, figuring out and knowing how to adapt to new health challenges. So again, always think of that optimism rather than dwell on fear or any worst case scenarios. Remember, hey, think our ancestors overcame the odds somehow, right? They overcame living life without modern medicine. They procreated, they lived a life. How are any of us alive if our ancestors had no magic pills, no injections, no modern medicine? According to the CDC, the FDA, and corporate media, none of them should even have survived, right? So our bodies can overcome odds in ways we never thought possible. We survive every moment, right? We are thriving every moment. Think about someone asking you, hey, what's happening? What's new with you recently? Well, think about that happening in our body perpetually every millisecond of every day, where our brain and our communication systems are doing that. Which is why, naturopath doctors, homeopath doctors, those clinicians rooted in earthy, self-sufficient solutions all say how the body is in a constant state of healing itself. It's always addressing issues that are going on, whether, we may not be aware of its function. It does it subconsciously, but it's still constantly working for us every minute, pumping blood, right? Every hour of every day, dealing with scrapes or cuts or bruises or sore joints or tendons, inflammation, maybe regulating bacteria and viruses and all our body imbalances or trying to get it back into balance. So our immune systems, they can be strengthened with practice just like a muscle can be strengthened with exercise. And our immune systems can be weakened just like a muscle can be weakened if we don't attend to it. So strengthening our immune system provides the best, pure, long-term, sustainable solution to all presently known and future unknown health issues that we may face. So given that, if you really think about it, when, why, where, or how would your body ever be doing something to harm you? Think about that. It wouldn't. It doesn't. Sure, there are rare autoimmune cases, but for the most part, our body does not harm itself. Our body only helps itself to get healthier, address these issues, get us to be as the best that it can be, the cellular level, all of our systems. So align with that mindset. Living a life of wellness is a continuous process. Even when we achieve our goals that we set, and setting goals are very important, we still need to work once we've achieved those goals to maintain optimal wellness and help our body cleanse and heal and recreate itself perpetually our entire lives. And this is another great example of how incredible our bodies are, is how often the cells in our organs regenerate. Now, hey, I'm going to give you some of these. They're not exact time frames, but generally speaking, the small intestine lining, 2 to 4 days. It regenerates itself. Brand new small intestine lining in 2 to 4 days. Stomach, 5 days for the thin lining of the stomach, 16 years for the cells from the main body of the stomach. Lungs, 2 to 3 weeks. Skin, 1 month. 1 month, your skin cells are brand new. Liver, 6 weeks. Bones, 3 months. Blood, 4 months. Well, red blood cells live for about 4 months, whereas white blood cells live on an average more than a year. Brain, 1 year. Now, brain cells typically last an entire lifetime, although there is a process called neurogenesis where, new nerve cells are created. So our bodies are incredibly amazing. I mean, it's really awe-inspiring how they have been put together and how they work. However, given all this, let me be clear that I do believe in modern medicine being great, beneficial, fantastic in many instances, all right? And I'm happy that we have advanced in many areas like we have and discovered new things. It's just that simply when modern medicine is used, it should be an episodic time frame. It should be as a remedy for an episodic moment that's going on, not a perpetual remedy or presented as a lifetime, all right, now you're going to have to do this the rest of your life. I use the example of you want your car to run as long as possible without intervention, right? Without taking it to a mechanic, having to put new parts into it or fix it up using external labor or parts, introducing new risk into the car. You want your home to operate as long as possible without intervention, right? So you want your cars and your homes to be self-sufficient and run as long as can be. So you should want just as much your own body to run as long as possible without intervention or introducing new risk. And I would say even more, because hey, if your body breaks down and you're lying in a hospital bed, does your car or your home mean very much to you in that moment? Probably not, right? At least I wouldn't think so. So yes, we should want our body to be as healthy and self-sufficient as possible. And those rare times that we do feel ill, that we have taken proper proactive wellness care of our body, and therefore we've given it the absolute best chance to quickly conquer the health risk and lead it on a path to working through that health issue. It really is self-sufficiency, which is a core patriotic trait to possess. But it does have a lot of immense physical, spiritual, and financial benefits as well, which from a patriot point of view, we'll talk about that in the next podcast episode as well. But a big driver of doing this episode and why I'm so passionate about wellness is, as a collective population, we are not taking care of our bodies. We are clearly on an unsustainable trajectory. This should be one of the most issues, if not the most issue, talked about and attended to in our public discourse. Yet, for the longest time, we've seen to just accept it, not really talk about it collectively or individually, usually point fingers to all these places we think are the culprits. There we go with division again. We talk about division a lot, right? Everything, as long as people can be divided on it, then no progress gets made. And trying to make it seem complex is a great way of keeping us divided, right? It's too complex for us to understand, and therefore we can't focus any efforts to help our nationwide and really world health issues. But folks, it is not complex. It really isn't. But we need to address the harsh reality of what's going on in our health status and find out what is making us so unhealthy. What is causing the rise in weight gains and chronic disease and autoimmune diseases? You know, the CDC, they updated their scoreboard that said 74% now of adults are overweight or obese. And that actually is 8 years old. That data is 8 years old. 74% of adults now are technically overweight or obese. The new head of the FDA, in his opening statements to the Senate committee, said the rise of childhood obesity is not due to a lack of willpower, and the rise of early onset Alzheimer's is not due to genetic disorders. And its graphs show how all age groups, starting around the 70s, but really in the 1980s, all at the same time, all age groups started gaining weight and getting us on this trend. So that really kind of deflects any finger pointing that people are getting lazier and making bad choices all the time. Every single age group would not do that at the exact same time. That's just not mathematically possible. The most sobering graphs that I have seen around obesity are graphs of the United States, state by state, color-coded, of BMIs, body mass index, which is really where, you know, the CDC talks about being overweight or being obese, from 1990 to onwards. And it only gets worse onwards, but states constantly moving up a category in the BMI index, new color categories having to be added, you know, like for a while, the highest BMI was above 30, and now they have above 35, now above 40. So it's only getting worse. I mean, think of like the settlers settling west across the USA. It's the same type of visual, only for how unhealthy from a weight gain standpoint we have gotten in our country. It's a big elephant in the room. I know it's hard to talk about for a lot of folks, but it didn't always be this way. Look at past photos and generations, you know, they rarely had obese people in them. You can look at a lot of them from beaches and stuff and back in the day, and it's really stark. A big part of weight gain comes through food. Of course, 70% of America's diet now consists of ultra processed food, which we'll talk about more in a moment, but there's also a big financial wellness impact to eat fast food so much. Costs a lot. The United Kingdom actually said their unhealthy food habits cost $268 billion a year. And here in the USA, we have the highest healthcare administrative costs by far, but yet, as we've talked about, we're not getting healthier. There's a great picture. Again, I'll put this in the show notes and a lot of others, all these references in the show notes about how we approach our health throughout our lives, and kind of climbing up a mountain that we can make the hard decisions or make easy decisions, and how if we make easy decisions, chances are later on that climb up that mountain, we're going to have a much, much harder time to get to the top. But if we slowly make moderate or semi-hard challenges throughout climbing that mountain, reaching that pinnacle is going to be much, much easier. So, you know, a great example of that is grocery shopping and how it's assumed that it's harder and more expensive to eat fresh organic food. And yeah, while optimal eating can sometimes cost more, not all the time, think of it as you're either investing in your wellness now in your life, or you're investing in your illness later in your life. You're either investing in your wellness or you're investing in your illness. That is the easiest way to think about it as you approach health decisions throughout your life. You know, some people say, oh, the system we have in place today is the only way we can feed everyone. Well, I don't believe that. You know, I believe in the farmers of our country, of this world, rising up to the challenge to feed our community. I mean, most all of them got into business and are passionate about what they do because they want to feed our community. But the question is, can we believe in you? Can we believe in us? There are some that believe that, hey, a lot of this info that I'm going to go through here, including labels on food, has been out there and known for a while, but people are still making poor decisions because people ultimately want to eat unhealthy, nutrient-depleted, mass industrial produced food. Is that you? Is that something you believe? You know, I can certainly understand a cost financial factor playing a big role, but outside of that, why would someone make an unhealthy choice? I don't know. So let's see if we can uncover some of those whys. All right, moving into the big pharma industry, we talked in an earlier episode about narratives, flows of information, how often things are framed as, oh, we're doing this for your safety. This is for your safety. In order to get you to comply or go along with, whatever it is that they're pushing at that time. And how we see in a lot of these movies that we side with the resistance, like, Star Wars and Hunger Games and all of that. But we can't see oppressive forces when it happens to us in real life. So go check out episode 1 if you have not listened to it yet. We know the media is controlled by a small few. And same goes with what we call big pharma, or the pharmaceutical companies, or the vast pharmaceutical industry and their broad reach on many aspects of our life, including big food and big ag, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And I'm going to say they a lot in this episode. And you may wonder, who is they? Who are these small few? Well, it's really just the most powerful of the powerful in the world. A lot of times behind the shadows, behind the curtain. We talked in the first episode about the same 3 companies basically owning every company in the world. And so therefore those companies have owners. It's the people behind the scenes who truly run the show, including and truly run the politicians. George Carlin actually talked about them several times a long time ago. I'll include some links in here. But they're really the reason why, regardless of who our past presidents are, the last 60 years or so especially, or who was in power in Congress, how there's really not much difference in how our country is ran. I know there's a few outliers to this, but I hope we can all agree in unity that medications that truly cure something are short-term in nature. Antibiotics, pain meds related to an accident or post-pregnancy, those are meant to help you in the short term, get you over a very clear episodic health issue. Compare those to what's called maintenance medications, or blood pressure meds, or cholesterol meds, or many of the new medications we see on commercials on our TVs, which we talked about in episode 1, how the USA is one of only 2 countries in the world that allows pharmaceutical ads on TV. Those things are customer for life business models. They want lifetime customers because there's no real end date to taking those pills. Sure, it's presented under the appearance of helping you, but ultimately there's a financial engine behind it. Besides the financial engine is the concern on the health side. A friend of mine who has gone through a lot in his young life, and he recently sent out a picture of all the bottles he received after going through a certain medical condition and experiencing some adverse events. And I'm not joking, there was literally 20 pill bottles in this picture. 20. Now, no one can say that there has been sufficient testing, double-blinded placebo trials, which are the, kind of the gold standard of testing. Certainly not long-term testing, right, either, on the interactions between 20 drugs taken at once. No one can say that. So by that alone, what are we doing here, folks? At a minimum, we're taking a risk by ingesting so many medications on an ongoing basis. That's common sense. That risk may be worth it, given the medical conditions being worked through, or it may not be worth it. But just think for a moment, when is the last time you heard a pharma rep or commercial publicly talk about anything natural? About encouraging you to live a holistically healthy life. Like an approach, like, hey, we here, us pharmaceutical company, we're here if you need us, but we want you to be healthy. Here is what we're doing towards proactive wellness initiatives, and we're only here as a last resort. Do you hear that message? No, we don't, right? And a lot of people say, hey, these pharmaceutical companies have been in business for 100 years, and how many diseases or illnesses have they truly cured? Well, that's another way of looking at it too. So doctors back in the day, they had to use holistic health in their assessment and treatment. A lot of doctors, even today, you hear about ones over in Greece, they tell you if you're sick, go swim in the sea. Or doctors over in Japan, when you get ill, they say, hey, well, take a walk in the forest. Or Spain's doctors say, hey, go get some sunlight. It's been said there's British Columbia doctors that prescribe passes to nature parks to those suffering from mental illness. So we know holistic health assessments and treatments have been there since the dawn of time and still continue this day, but they're getting harder and harder to know about and practice and recommended. Why is that? When did that happen? Well, medical schools started and became controlled by a select few or heavily funded around about 100 years ago, where they barred naturopath type of healing. They really vilified herbs and natural earthy pathways and healers. They took over the medical school curriculum and books and basically said holistic treatment is not going to be our approach, that all health issues really need to be carved out with a diagnosis, which means like, right, a procedure code or diagnosis code. Assign that specific procedure to that specific diagnosis. And that's really when the collective mindset was shifted from a lot of our non-life-threatening health issues being essentially our body's self-cleaning programs to where we're starting to overdiagnose our health issues and how those health issues only can be fixed with chemicals or pills or injections and surgeries, and how medications went from naturally sourced from the earth to lab made. Even though many pharma products and ingredients have bases that are composed of compounds found in plants and other naturally derived sources, not just because that's where the true healing power is at, but also because they cannot patent anything from nature. So they need to make a compound of it with their unique take on it in order to patent it and therefore control it, because something that is patented then has protections from a financial and regulatory perspective. We know today how the FDA goes after any natural remedy, prevents the information from getting out, which is why, and many others really, have to put these disclaimers at the beginning that I did, because they can sue you, they can go after you. You know, why is that money, right? There's no money in natural healing. Because you can't patent anything from nature, you can't really make a lot of money off of anything that's from nature. So it is ironic that right around the time when the medical system was overtaken and they started vilifying plant medicine, including cannabis and other mind-altering substances, which opened the door of perception to be open and free from controlling forces, which we'll talk about a little bit more later in this episode. It is ironic that that was right around the time that the Federal Reserve central banking system that governs our currency and money supply was also created, which we'll get into in the next episode on business and politics. But anyway, it also was around that time that cancer started developing more frequently. The same select few who started the pharma industry and took over those medical schools and curriculum, removed those natural-based treatments, also went on to found then the American Cancer Society. We talked about in episode 1 how much funding the media has by big pharma, which you can see in those paid by pharma company clips that I had in episode 1, as well as all the pharma ads that are on TV. The creation and role of PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers. They were meant to be good and claimed to essentially bring down prices, but they're now owned and controlled by the same pharma companies that they're supposed to help mediate between and regulate. So the same people now control the prices too, along with the medical training treatment system that are prescribing the drugs that they make. How? Wait a minute, that just seems so circular. Even the mainstream media revealed a shocking study to find that some cancer drugs were fast-tracked by the FDA that remain unproven. That doesn't make any sense. Why would we do that? It's important to note too, cancer is something that a lot of fear is driven off of. And a big misnomer about cancer is that we're helpless, right? That there's nothing we can do. But from the government's own cancer website, cancer.gov, itself talks about 90 to 95% and above of cancer is from impact to us post-birth and not from the genes or hereditary nature that we inherit from our parents or our ancestors. 90 to 95% of cancer is from after we're born, which means we have control over it, which means we're not helpless. All right? We have so much power and ability to live healthy lives. So be aware of and remember all these forces at play, how they came about, how they're connected. And remember, ultimately, doctors and any health professional involved in your care system, they work for you. You are the boss. Doctors are not absolute authority figures. You do not have to do what they tell you. You can ask all the questions you want. You can get a second opinion. You do not have to explain your decisions. Think of it this way. You get diagnosed every day, right? When it comes to how you're feeling and what your body's telling you, And therefore, it's very accurate to say that you are your best doctor, because no one is more tuned into and monitoring your health than you are. Also, remember, your doctors are human too. They are imperfect. All humans are not perfect. You also don't know what financial incentives they may have behind the scenes. You don't know who they really are. You get an average of 5 to 7 minutes with them. That's what the average doctor visit is. You don't know the lifestyle they live when they're just regular people out living their lives, which is always funny to me, right? It's best exemplified and when you see doctors or nurses out in the smoking section of a hospital, smoking right next to a lot of times patients or guests of the hospital. That's just always kind of do a double take. What's going on there? So yes, doctors are important. You should listen to them, ask them questions, hear about all the options, be sure you fully understand the situation. However, when you are so ill that you need to go to the doctor, if your doctor prescribes you medication without first asking you about your diet, your quality of your meals, your relationship with food, your sleep, your exercise routine, your water consumption, the stress in your life from social factors, financial factors, environmental conditions. If they are not first asking you about all of that, which it's pretty much tough to do in 5 to 7 minutes, then it's been said that you don't have a doctor, you essentially have a drug dealer. And I know that sounds harsh, and I don't want to put down doctors. A lot of doctors are great people, but where we're at in the system, it's tough to argue against that philosophy or that perspective. My friend and former Army captain and executive director of a health freedom organization, Alex Zeck, put it so eloquently well that I want to repeat what he said here. Don't blindly accept what your doctor says. Don't blindly dismiss what your doctor says. Don't blindly accept what alternative doctors or platforms say. Don't blindly dismiss what alternative doctors or alternative platforms say. Don't blindly accept what the media says. Don't blindly dismiss what the media says. Stop blindly accepting anything and stop blindly dismissing. And I'd say that's true about really many areas of life. The news, politics, gossip about friends. Don't judge. Don't prejudge. Don't walk into it with a judgment already because it's coming from this source. Judgment is the worst. When faced with any clinical decision, simply evaluate all the medical decisions on safety studies, proven efficacy, and medical necessity given your specific situation and options. As we talked about earlier, weigh all those risks and make the best decision that you can make at that time. And if your doctor gets angry or irritated with you for asking them questions or for you wanting time to seek out a second opinion or do your own research, and for the fact that you're asking them to provide their knowledge and experience on what they've found, why they're saying what they are saying, or what you have found through your own research, then that should tell you something. If your doctor is getting irritated with you or is not respecting you in that moment, I would certainly raise an eyebrow and wonder about why that is and how that makes you feel as a person trying to be knowledgeable and involved in your own healthcare, which every doctor should ultimately want, is a very informed and powerful consumer. But hey, we are realizing more and more what our innate intuition has been telling us for a while, that there is so much more to health than what you see on a TV or what you hear in the 5 minutes you get with your doctor during a visit. And there has never been more distrust of government entities, mainstream media, extremely large monopolistic corporations, allopathic medicine, and pharmaceutical companies, the richest people in the world, than there is right now. So check your preconceptions and challenge your initial assumptions. Make this a habit. Knowledge is power, and it helps you feel more in control and prepared and healthy within a rapidly changing environment. All right, so that's big pharma. Now on to big food, big agriculture. Mergers and acquisitions have played a huge effect here. 3 to 5 companies control most all of the industrial food supply that exists out there. And mergers and acquisitions actually have played a huge role and taken a huge toll on many industries, but notably agriculture, and how that has forced so many farmers into these massive contracts and ways of farming. The documentary Food Inc. did a great job showing that corporatization, the systemization, and even the digitalization of not just our food system, but of food itself. animals or plants itself, but especially the oppressive treatment of farmers. I remember my nutrition books clearly showed how it's not the food or the animal, it's the system, and in the diversity and where did that food and animal come from, and how are you eating it in proportion to other foods. The industrial food system has gotten to the point where plumping up mass-produced animals with growth hormones and other chemicals to help them fit the marker better and quicker at the least overall cost to the system, and often at the expense of people's health, but also so produce crops with no weeds. Well, that's because the seed and the herbicide are made by the same company, genetically engineered in such a way to cause that effect. And a lot of that's through Roundup and through the main ingredient in their, glyphosate, which has now produced an $80 million verdict, a $289 million verdict, a $2 billion and a $9 billion class action settlement, all in favor of plaintiffs who developed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. In 2021, the company Bayer, who bought out the original manufacturer Monsanto, said they would stop putting glyphosate into their products by 2023, but just for residential use, that commercial crops and use for those can still remain, and therefore it still impacts the food that we eat. And there was a study by the Environmental Working Group that found glyphosate in every single sampled kids cereal. I think there's like 20 of them that they sampled. So this approach of maintaining the process at mass scale at all costs, putting band-aids where needed instead of addressing root causes that prioritize health and safety, takes its toll. Rather than when a problem comes up, say, hey, what should we do here from a health standpoint? It's more so, what can we do to keep the system intact, keep it running? So like ammonia, soaking meat in ammonia and like pink slime, it's crazy to even think about, but I'm putting in a clip in the show notes about ABC News, the mainstream media even, talking about our food getting poisoned. This was over a decade ago with this pink slime in the beef, which 70% of the ground beef they said we buy at the supermarket contains this pink slime, which is a filler in the meat. And by the way, it does not have to be listed on the label. And by the way, it was approved by someone in the government who then went to work for that company that made that product and made millions of dollars. And today, under current ethics board, she could not have immediately joined that company. But that just shows the type of corruption of how it works. A lot of time, these regulatory agencies and the companies they're supposed to regulate, those people at the executive level will bounce back and forth between them. That also is something to be questioned. That also is a Adult Santa Claus Effect moment, knowing that these organizations who we're supposed to trust have levers behind them that are controlled by a few and influenced by a few. It's also amazing to me how the regulated industries are the ones that get the mass recalls, right? E. coli or Listeria or whatever it is. Not the small organic farms, yet it's those small organic farms that get scrutinized by most of the regulatory agencies. They try to say that, oh, you got to have a sterile indoor environment to produce food. But yet it's all those sterile indoor environments that come out with recalls because there was contaminants. But they hate outdoor processing plants because they say it does not make it healthy. There's too much risk there. Another aspect of mass-produced food is concentrated fruit juices. And the only way you can do that is by adding sugar to that concentrate. Get real fruit juices. Look for not from concentrate. Unless you are consuming them excessively or extreme in some way, natural sugars from good clean fruits are good for you. No one can say that it's too much sugar, unless, like I said, you're going excessive or extreme. Fruit, natural fruit is good, just not industrial processed sugars. Triple washed, how about that one as part of the industrial process? Triple washed or ready to eat greens typically are rinsed to remove dirt, debris, and grit, and then washed in water. And that water contains chlorine or another sanitizer. This is, again, referenced in the show notes. I'm not making this up. And then it's rinsed again. But it's even admitted that even throughout that, it doesn't necessarily get rid of all bacteria that can cause food poisoning. It's, still like 99%. So Again, I ask at what cost. I've also seen videos of grocery stores, and when you go to the produce section and all those misters are there, a lot of us assume that they are just water, right? They're just misting down water. But if you look up above, there are actually chemical solutions that contain chemicals and not just water. So all of this has caused the need to have a world seed bank, because otherwise we're in danger of losing the diversity that this planet has always grown up with when it comes to natural, non-genetically modified seeds. So there is this place located up in the North Pole, this global seed vault, opened in 2008 to preserve 4.5 million seed samples representing the genetic diversity of the world's crops. Currently, the vault stores over 930,000 seed varieties in its carefully controlled sub-zero environment, ensuring their longevity for centuries. So it's not just how the animals and plants are grown, what type of seeds are getting used for them, or if they're getting growth hormones or steroids or antibiotics, things like this. But it's then they go into the manufacturing processes that adds all these additives. And there is something called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. When something is designated as GRAS, it is exempted from the usual Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act food additive tolerance requirements, which means that it's not subject to pre-market review and approval by the FDA before it goes into our foods. So there's all these loopholes here that exist to put these additives into our food. An example is partially hydrogenated oils. In 2013, the FDA made a determination that they are no longer generally recognized as safe in human food. So this is straight from the American Heart Association, folks, that as of June 2018, manufacturers cannot add partially hydrogenated oils to foods. However, some foods still contain them because those foods were part of a manufacturing process that began before the FDA's cutoff date. These types of foods include, I'm going to list off several of them: microwave popcorn, vegetable oil, vegetable shortening, bakery items made with margarine or vegetable shortening, non-dairy coffee creamers, potato chips, corn chips, pre-made pizza dough, frosting. A lot of stuff there. So before consuming these foods, read the labels to ensure they do not contain partially hydrogenated oil or artificial trans fats, which, since none of them are animals, any trans fat would be artificial. So yeah, there's been a lot of deception on additives for so long. The FDA is not being transparent with people on the safety of food additives. Sound research is not occurring often enough before recommendations are made or foods are put out there, and it's really a corrupt disservice to us, the people who are eating this food and thinking that it has gone, assuming that it has gone through these regulations. CBS even themselves talked about how it was causing issues. The Guardian, there's an article about how there's a bunch of ingredients that are banned in Europe, but we still allow them here in the USA. That doesn't really make any sense. A lot of links here, folks, to look at on this. A really good explanation of the regulatory inconsistencies and consequently the top EU banned foods to avoid here in the USA. You may want to check that out. But I mentioned the EWG, the Environmental Working Group. They're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to protecting human health and the environment. They do research, education. They empower people to live healthier lives in a healthier environment. They do food scores, talk a lot about sunscreen, many things. You may have seen in January, the FDA finally said they were going to ban Red 3, and that, again, the manufacturers have a couple years to get it out of their manufacturing process. It doesn't stop right away. But the EWG did put out a list of 1,000 or so foods that still contain Red 3, but again, won't take effect until 2028. So we know that's dangerous, and again, there's a lot more additives that are dangerous, but at least the authorities, the quote-unquote authorities, have finally said Red 3 is dangerous, but chances are you're still going to be eating it if you don't know which foods they're still going to be in. We talked a little bit about fast food. There was a study about how toxic compounds are found in 80% of fast food. And you can argue about the level of toxicity, But after all we've explained, do you really want to trust the mass industrial food system with those toxicity levels and whether or not they are above the threshold of being harmful to us? There's even a lawsuit that I'll link here right now in an upcoming trial by jury on Girl Scout cookies. Can you believe that? Claiming that they are contaminated with dangerous heavy metals, including aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, lead, mercury, pesticides, including glyphosate. But hey, it's not just foods that these toxins exist, it's other stuff too. Hair dye. Can you believe this? We just don't know a lot of this stuff until enough time passes where long-term studies are done, or at least found out, whether it's a real study or whether it's an inadvertent study and people just start to realize it. But there are these hairstylists now that are suing due to a link between hair dyes and cancer. And NBC News covered this. Link into the article. Very scary stuff. Also, home and cleaning products. So again, it's not just food. It's not just stuff we put on our body or in our body. Stuff we use to clean our home. A 2023 study came out on how nearly every cleaning product in our home may release hundreds of potentially toxic chemicals when used. And again, the EWG tested 30 common household products such as glass cleaners, stain removers, air freshener. All but one released measurable levels of volatile compounds, tiny toxins linked to cancers, asthma, fertility problems when inhaled. This is real stuff, folks. I mean, this is, again, I don't want to downplay it. These are real moments where you wake up and you realize, I kind of always knew that, but I really got to face up to it, right? I kind of thought Santa wasn't real, but I gotta really go through the process and live my life with full acceptance that Santa's not real. That's what's happening here with a lot of these. Beauty products as well. There's a Business Insider article about being aware of labels claiming they're natural on beauty products. But instead, look for products that don't have fragrances, or they don't have dyes, they don't have parabens, they don't have preservatives. That's better. And lastly, I'll say, glyphosate, Roundup. We talked earlier about their court rulings where they were found guilty. These big industries, they're controlled by a few. And a good way to understand how it works is think about how one acquired the other. Bayer is a pharmaceutical company. Monsanto is a pesticide company. Bayer bought Monsanto. Bayer makes drugs for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Monsanto makes a chemical called glyphosate to spray on food crops, and glyphosate has been proven to cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So again, you're like, wow, it all comes around full circle. So, and crazy stuff, but we're going to stay positive. We're going to keep going. A lot of good things that we're going to still cover here. A lot of ways to be optimistic, but education is important so that you can start making fresh choices, different choices in your life. We need less processed, more local, more empowered local economies. It's a win-win-win all around. The essence of my next business, Fresh Choice KC, a friend of mine recently talking about it, and he described it. Heath, it sounds like it's like the redefinition and realignment of community as a source of sustainability. And he's actually exactly right. Thinking about where we've come from our earlier civilizations, our community was our source of sustainability. I would also add that it's a source of best health, as well as a best chance for our local economies to thrive. It's not a rejection of a global economy. It's simply reducing risk, both supply chain risk as well as health risk. Health gets improved through freshness, transparency, natural, non-toxic, body planet, friendly options, angled towards self-sufficiency, simplicity, and low cost. I've said that we have reached this point of human evolution where we have all the info. We carry compact digital world encyclopedias on us pretty much everywhere we go. We can say we don't know the information, but we really can't claim anymore that we don't have access to the information. Whether we access it or not is a choice. And we've seen enough and learned enough over the years to understand how our choices and how we live our lives affect our health and our community's health. We simply just reached a point where it's a matter of choices. And I say it's time we start making fresh choices. We have endless opportunities every day in many parts of our lives to make a fresh choice, especially in concentrating on those 4 core areas of each of our lives that everyone in the world shares. It creates and drives most of our existence: health, home, food, and clothing. All right, on to some common myths about certain things, health issues, several Adult Santa Claus Effect moments here. Starting off with fat. All right, it is not a secret that many years ago, the sugar industry shifted the narrative blame to fat and caused us to toss out our butter, our bacon, our beef, our meats, our eggs, etc., and replace them with margarine and vegetable oils, low-fat turkey bacon, cartons of egg whites, and a big rise of vegetarian or vegan diets. Yeah, we talked earlier, we have not gotten healthier though, and in fact, we've gone very far in the opposite direction. I'm not saying fat is the one thing, I'm just saying again, what we're doing is not working. So there are several resources I'm linking to here about that, but we know there was a big war on fats for quite some time. However, read directly from this nutrition certification book about fats and say, and this is quote word for word, folks like the French, the Greeks, and the Scandinavians kept eating olive oil, fatty sardines, butter, cream, fatty meats, full-fat yogurt, and cheese, but they seemed perfectly fine. Many southern hemisphere countries like Costa Rica chow down on avocado and coconut and still manage to live healthy lives relatively free of cardiovascular disease. Ethiopians and Mongolians put butter in their coffee and tea. Indigenous Arctic peoples like to eat whale and seal blubber. While Arctic populations now have many health issues, mostly thanks to modern processed food, they do not seem to have chronic metabolic diseases if they live on just their traditional forage diet. Traditional East African cattle herders drink full-fat milk straight from the cow, not to mention living mostly on meat, milk from that cow. During the low-fat years, this drove Western diet researchers nuts, right? They hated this. How could people around the world eat bad stuff and stay so lean and healthy? Again, this is straight out of a reputed nutrition certification textbook. Scientists even started calling this the French paradox. Of course, though, there are no paradoxes in nature. A paradox means we don't fully understand what's happening. What really occurred was that in areas where low fat was promoted as healthy, bullet point number one, people who were overly focused on low fat products ended up eating a lot more processed food. Bullet point number two, people focused on the badness of a particular nutrient like fat rather than focusing on eating high quality, delicious food in a mindful way. Bullet point number three, people often felt less satisfied with their meals because, as you'll remember, and as we know, eating fat releases satiety hormones, to tell you that you're full, satisfied. So they ended up eating more overall. Bullet point number four, people ate more processed sugars. They went to more processed sugars and carbs to make up for that missing fat. And there are plenty of industrial chemicals that are producing those processed sugars in processed food. And finally, bullet point number five, people focus on the nutrient itself instead of, again, the whole diet in a broader context, which when we're talking about the very complex human bodies, it is never about one specific nutrient. It is always needs to be taken in a holistic fashion. So those are great examples of all over the world where people had very fat dominant diets, but yet did not have huge heart issues. Even the American Heart Association admits it on their website, saying fats get a bad rap, even though it's a nutrient we need in our diets. Does my body need fats, it says? Yes, it does. Dietary fats are essential to give your body energy and to support cell function. Dietary fats also help your body absorb some nutrients and materials of important hormones, unquote. That is straight from the American Heart Association. How about, again, with the American Heart Association, on trans fats? There are two broad types of trans fats found in foods, naturally occurring and artificial trans fat. Naturally occurring are those produced in the gut of some animals and foods made from some of these animals, like milk and meat products. Artificial trans fats, or trans fatty acids, are created in an industrial process that adds hydrogen to liquid vegetable oils to make them more solid. There we were talking again about those hydrogenated oils. And we talked earlier about how they cannot add those to foods anymore, but they still do for some of them due to a loophole. Also, when it comes to fats, oils, simply put, folks, look up the history of how all these vegetable oils came to be. It's not something that is fun to watch, but it's something you need to know if you continue to eat vegetable oils like Crisco or canola oil or sunflower oil, anything on a label that talks about being heavily from vegetable oils. Stick to healthy options like olive oil and coconut oil. All right, cholesterol. Big one, right? Cholesterol is not the problem. We need cholesterol to live. Our cells need it. Our brains need it. Our own liver and other bodily tissues make most of the cholesterol in our body. And our liver tightly controls the relationship between the cholesterol we eat and the cholesterol we make. Our sex hormones and other hormones that are involved in blood sugar regulation are made from cholesterol. Cholesterol is what keeps our cell membrane strong while enabling essential signaling transduction. You can tell I'm quoting from a nutrition textbook here, that all life requires at small cell layers, the billions and trillions of cell layers and networks in our bodies. That cholesterol keeps our cell membranes very strong. HDL and LDL, we think of those as cholesterol. They're not actually cholesterol. They are proteins, carrier proteins at that. Remember, our body does not make anything bad. So bad cholesterol is really just not a thing if you want to look at it that way. HDL, the carrier protein, carries excess cholesterol back to the liver to be recycled, not to get rid of, to be recycled in the body. LDL, that carrier protein, is a repairer and rebuilder of cells, especially attending to the biggest expenditure of energy in our body, our brain. So our brains and tissues need cholesterol. And think about how one of the fattiest foods with the highest amount of cholesterol is breast milk, because a baby's brain needs that cholesterol at that infant age to develop strongly, develop quickly, to develop well. I'm putting in some links in there on cholesterol impact on brain function and Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's has been said to be the disappearance of your brain's insulation, the myelin. And what is myelin? It's the white matter of your brain, what makes up 75% of your brainwave. And what is myelin made of? You guessed it, cholesterol. But people think, hey, cholesterol is going to give me heart attacks. And actually, there is no proven relation between cholesterol and heart disease. Doctors and cardiologists, and a fairly recent study in the British Medical Journal, it says it. High cholesterol diet is not linked to increased heart risk, study shows. Again, check the show notes. But yet, many people promote low-fat, low-cholesterol foods rather than promoting portion control in relation to energy transfer, whole foods, and limiting refined carbohydrates. Therefore, that fake sugar and salt and all the chemicals needed to keep those foods shelf stable, those are what are actually really bad for your body. The Weston A. Price Foundation is a great resource on all of this, folks, and so much more. They output incredible information, very valuable, and I have a link to them in the show notes as well. Salt. Let's talk about salt for a moment. Another one that just might be time to go through an adult Santa Claus effect moment. We need salt. We need phosphates for energy through ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is a molecule that provides energy for many cellular processes. However, we need the good kind of salt, ideally sea salt, or if you can't get that, then anything from the earth, and not table salt, because table salt is what actually then damages arteries. And there's some links that I show on that process and that information. Salt is also great for hydration. Put a couple kernels of Celtic sea salt into your water and you will quickly notice your body absorbing water better, quicker from a hydration standpoint, processing water. It's incredible. Salt is not bad. Get the right kind of salt. Sunblock and sunscreen. The sun, really, right? All right, a little bit on my story. I didn't share in the last one that I've had a lot of skin issues because I had a college job for a couple summers, working construction, a lot of times on the roof, putting on new shingles, new roofs. And usually come the mid-morning break, shirt came off and was off for the rest of the day. And I got very dark those summers, which I thought was cool at the time, but paid for it later on in life. And looking back on it, someone as fair-skinned as myself, there's no way I should ever get that dark. So I have gotten a lot of basal cell carcinomas in my life. I'll just admit that to the world. And I had to work through that. And I did that in a couple ways to where I have not gotten them in a long while. And the reason that I feel I haven't gotten them is mostly because of two things. One is living a wellness life. I have started to really change a lot of my life over these past 10 years to be really strong from a wellness standpoint with food, nutrition, exercise, all different aspects. Stress, right? Stress. Lower that. Great news. Again, I don't want this all to be bad stuff. There is great news out there for anybody who has had sun damage in the past. There is something almost I call a miracle, a second chance at life for your skin. It's called Fluoride. I'll put it in the show notes. It's just a 2-week treatment, twice a day. It's a cream. Put it on your skin. This thing attacks just the unhealthy skin cells, the ones who have potential to develop into basal cell carcinoma or problematic skin cells in the future. And it leaves the healthy skin cells totally intact. So it's weird that over time, over those 2 weeks, a lot of your skin will just stay perfectly normal, but you'll see these other red spots pop up and it's killing them off. It's very effective, incredible stuff that finally one of my dermatologists told me about, and I've done a lot of 2-week treatments on that. So there's great hope out there. I would not recommend it for the face. The face is very sensitive, a lot more sensitive than the body. But for the face, there are things you can do like Levulon blue light treatment. I did that for the face. That was incredible as well. Same type of concept. It's a one-time use though, and really helps the facial skin from past sun damage. All right, so when it comes to sunlight and sunlight generating vitamin D and its effect on the immune system, sure, we all know about vitamin C and the importance of vitamin C on the immune system. But vitamin D is the maestro. It's the conductor of the symphony, if you will, of our immune system. It's very well publicized of relation between vitamin D and illnesses, as in the more higher vitamin D levels, the less amount of illnesses, especially during COVID, actually, where many natural-based doctors were recommending vitamin D3 along with vitamin C and zinc and quercetin as a base combo that they listed to get through a flu incident, along with, of course, rest and fluids and things like that. Sunlight is really the best source of vitamin D. And your skin hosts a type of cholesterol, there we go with cholesterol again, that functions as a precursor to vitamin D. So when that cholesterol compound is exposed to sunlight, it becomes vitamin D. And sun-derived vitamin D may circulate for twice as long as vitamin D from food or from supplements. So sunlight vitamin D is so important. Fish and seafood are very rich in vitamin D as well. And many of these foods are also rich in heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. Mushrooms are the only vegetarian source of vitamin D. Mushrooms, right? So mysterious. Their own kingdom. They are incredible. So, in a lot of ways, people say it's not the sunlight that's the harm, it's the chemicals in the sunscreen. That we've gotten sunlight for millions of years. We seem relatively fine. That sunscreen was invented in the 1930s and really went mainstream in the 1950s, which happened to be the same decade that melanoma started to really take off. But is it the sun's fault? I don't know. I'm including a study in the British Journal of Dermatology that shows that the sun is likely nothing more than a scapegoat in the development of melanoma, and that the sharp increase may actually be, quote, an artifact caused by diagnostic drift, which means it was misdiagnosed. Boy, something to really make you think, huh? That we should not be afraid of the sun, that our skin needs some sun. That actually is in the top 10 that we'll cover here at the end. But the last thing I'll say on the sun and sunblock sunscreen, sure, you never want to get burnt, all right? And I'll say that later on too. But what is it about these sunscreens that could be harming us? And what is the difference between some of the sunscreens we see and what we know is sunblock? Well, to say something is a sunblock, it's got to actually keep the sun out, which means it has to deflect the rays of the sun, keep those rays out. Think about those lifeguards who used to, they used to have a white nose because they put sunblock on their nose. That was zinc oxide based. That has advanced a lot to modern day where you can find those sunblocks and they're translucent. They don't have to show that you have a cake of white stuff on your face. However, sunscreens, they don't keep the sun rays out. They get applied in your skin and absorb in your skin. And what they're meant to do is they're meant to allow the sun's rays into the skin and then activate a chemical process that changes the rays into passive heat energy. So it changes the harmful UVA or UVB spectrums into harmless heat energy. I don't know. That sounds a little woo-woo to me. And FDA studies have showed their systemic absorption into the bloodstream. I'll put a link there. And EWG, they do a great job of researching these products. So really reconsider sunlight, sunscreen, sunblock. Look for sunblocks that have zinc oxide. They don't sting the eyes then. They last much longer out in the sun. They're much more shelf stable too. You can keep them for longer. Those chemical sunscreens, they sting the eyes. You have to keep reapplying them. And it's been said that they really only have about a 6-month shelf life once they're opened. All right, electricity. There is a book called Invisible Rainbow that blew my mind when it came to electricity. It approaches very much from a clinical nature, talking about clinical studies all the way back to the mid-1750s about electricity when the first electrical currents were getting developed. And it's funny, humans, how curious we are, how it talked about that back in that time, humans would actually line up together, hold hands, and one person would get shocked at the end of the line, and that shock would then reverberate all throughout the humans, just so they could feel what it means to get shocked. That's how curious they were. That's how curious humans are, right? But it chronicled all the clinical studies that were done from the mid-1750s up till today. You can imagine back then, you could take people from non-electrified environments and put them into electrified environments and do tests on them of how then that electrified environment impacts them. Today, that's not possible, right? We are born into an electrified environment. Electricity, Wi-Fi, all these types of radio waves are all around us. So we can never do that type of trials. But back then they could. And so this person chronicles a lot of them. And that the symptoms that people would get from this introduction to electricity are very similar to the symptoms that we experience for what we call as colds or flus. Whoa, right? Wow. He also talked about that the pandemics that we hear a lot in the news about in the 1880s or early 1900s or even today, that they all followed electromagnetic leaps in technology. That when an electromagnetic leap in technology came out, that soon after that, a widespread pandemic, a perceived pandemic of cold flu type of illnesses occurred. So I'm telling you, it really blew my mind and really made me skeptical of electricity in all of its forms. Cell phones are obviously a perfect example, tablets, laptops. I don't know if anybody is like me, that the tips of your fingers, you start to feel your nerve endings feeling a little bit different when you're on your phone a lot or typing a lot. A lot of times I drop my phone upon picking it up and feel I have pretty good hands. It feels like your body is there's like a little shock there, like, whoa, what are you doing? What are you picking this up for? So there is a lot of radiation there from the phones. There's a video that shows ants around a phone and just randomly crawling around a phone. And then as soon as that phone starts ringing and activating those radio waves, that the ants go then in a perfect circle around the phone, that they then feel that radiation occurring. So anything to do with electricity, AirPods, all of that stuff should really be looked at with caution right now, as well as blue light. Again, we don't really need people to prove to us that it's bad. When our bodies, they talk to us, right? We diagnose ourselves every day, and we have groggy eyes when we look at a computer for a long time. Our body feels, when we're close to electricity or have a laptop on our lap, things happen, right? Our body feels it. It may be subtle, but it may be pretty strong. So I included some studies of a lot of negative effects of electromagnetic exposure. I know the big talk of the day is about 5G. There's a doctor who says putting up tens of millions of 5G antenna without a single biological test of safety, certainly long-term safety, has got to be a very bad idea. One of the worst ideas anyone's ever had. So I'm putting some links in there. But electricity has a history, and electricity has an impact on the human body, all right, which corresponds with grounding and earthing, which is going to be in the top 10 later on as well. Another adult Santa Claus effect moment, fluoride. You've probably heard this one, but I don't know if you have heard how actually hazardous fluoride is from an industrial waste standpoint. I mean, think hazmat suit hazardous. Another way to look at it is if someone gave you a glass of water and before they gave that to you, they put some sodium fluoride into it, they would get arrested for doing that. It's also illegal to dump fluoride into our lakes and rivers. So you have to ask, why is it perfectly fine then to put into our drinking water and into our toothpaste? There's a dentist that talks about showing how toothpaste says if you swallow it, call poison control. And he compares the amount of toothpaste that it takes for them to consider you swallowing too much to a glass of water and the amount of fluoride that's in there that comes out of our taps and our faucets being very well relationally proportioned. So if we swallow it from toothpaste, we better call poison control, but yet we can have it in our tap water. There is also a video of showing how hazardous it is when there was a spill. I mean, not only were people in hazmat suits, but it melted through concrete. I mean, literally melted through concrete. So Florida and a lot of places have started to remove fluoride from their drinking water. Fluoride is said to calcify the pineal gland, which is a very important gland in our body for a lot of body regulation, but especially brain function, emotional function, thought process. So again, I don't know, but it seems like we need to face up to the adult Santa Claus effect moment that fluoride is actually not good for us. Plant medicine. All right, plant medicine. You can call them mind-altering substances. It's kind of like conspiracy theory. It kind of gets into wordmanship that's meant to make you scared. But let's look at cannabis, an easy example. It was vilified, as we talked about back when natural remedies started to get vilified back in the 1920s, 1930s. That's when a movie called Reefer Madness came out and tried to scare everybody about cannabis. And really, until a little over a decade ago, those authorities fought forever on keeping cannabis illegal, even though most all of us either have done it or have grown up around people or scenes where it was happening. And we at least know that those scenes, those people did not turn into the apocalypse. They did not become crazy. They did not get out of control versus, let's face it, some of the parties that we go to where alcohol is heavily consumed, they can get out of control. So, fear just kept getting pushed down our throats until finally, 13 years ago at the ballot box in Colorado, a measure was passed to be brave and lead the way as a pioneer to legalize it. And by most measures, Colorado and all the states that were after that, it's been a great success for pretty much everyone involved. Of course, there may be some smaller fragmented consequences that should be and need to be worked through, especially with children. The mind is developing until 25 years of age. So you don't want to mess with the mind too much before you're 25. But just like cannabis, so it is with psychedelics and all earthy or nature-based remedies. Their time has come. It is coming. It's going through legislatures right now. And let me tell you, that is going to have much more of an impact on human consciousness. Psychedelics, how these work is they produce a loss of ego, a loss of materialism, consumerism. It ends kind of the endless chase for happiness. And that's where Aldous Huxley came up with cleansing the doors of perception. It just lets you see things as is without any preconceptions at all. You don't have to think about it. You just know what it is. It's really tough to describe. A lot of people who try to describe it, it's tough to make sense of, but there is no preconceptions. There's no judgment. There's no bias. Everything is what it is. It's just truth. And there's just been a lot of studies on those things. The CIA, even on their website, talks about studies that they did back in the 60s to see how it would impact people. And folks, this just has a lot of impact for people who are dealing with mentally traumatizing illnesses. Think about veterans with PTSD. Think about people with opioid addictions, severe depression. There's just a lot of help that is out there that God put here on this earth for people. I mean, how could you ever say that something that is grown naturally on this earth should be illegal by man's law? That really doesn't make sense. The biggest one going through right now is ibogaine. Again, for a lot of PTSD, opium or narcotic addiction. Supposedly, this stuff is incredible. One treatment can completely set someone free from mentally traumatizing issues that they've been plagued with, or addictions, or any negative physiological mindset issues. I'm including a link to a recent podcast that Joe Rogan had on it with some experts. However, it is very, very important that you do not ever consider this a recreational drug. It needs to be done in a very controlled setting, which all of these should have a controlled setting where you're with people that you trust, who have done it before, who know how to help you through it. They have a plan, but especially this ibogaine, because if you take too much of it, it can cause cardiac arrest. So it's real serious stuff, but taken at the right levels and the right conditions, it is showing incredible, just earth-shattering breakthroughs for some of those people we care about the most and wanting to get their lives back. And lastly, I'll just say on plant medicine, especially mushrooms, this isn't just about health. Mushrooms are so powerful. I talked about, how mystical they are, being their own kingdom, how they're kind of like they have their own brain network of communication. But there are studies and instances where scientists and researchers have used, mushrooms, fungi to remove rust from buildings or remove oil spills from the beaches that are contaminated with oil spills after oil tankers, and even radioactive waste from Chernobyl or other sites that have had radioactive waste. That mushrooms can be almost programmed in a way to, take in this stuff and neutralize that impact. So it's not just a health standpoint of why we should be looking at this. There's a lot of other reasons why we should be looking at the power of plants. All right. Wow. So we went through some Santa Claus effect moments on fat, on cholesterol, salt, the sun, and types of sunblocks or sunscreens and what they do. Also electricity, fluoride, plant medicine. That was a lot, but now we are going to get into COVID and everything to do with vaccines or injections. And look out, right? Some of you may be rolling your eyes. Some of you may be kind of moving uncomfortably in your chair. It's a very uncomfortable truths coming your way. And we know the last 4 years were uncomfortable for a lot of people. And really everybody was impacted by it. And it's something that still is so recent that we all remember. Some of us may not be proud of how we acted in those moments. Some of us may not want to revisit it, but it's important with a lot of things in history that we do look back and learn from what happened so that it does not occur again in the future. So let's just cover as high level as we can what did occur, and we'll get into viruses and injections after we talk about kind of the COVID aspect. First off, many of you who know me know what bothered me the most about COVID is how there was hardly any talk of wellness, right? Of getting healthy, staying healthy, what you can do. Just heavily amplified how to avoid type of talk. The airwaves were pumping over and over. Avoid this, avoid that. Don't do this, don't do that. All these orders on where we can go, what activities we're allowed to engage in, how we could educate our children, how we could earn a living, how we could worship even. Rarely did true prevention and wellness get talked about. How to stay healthy. Do these things so that ideally you don't get sick in the first place. And even if you do get sick, you now have the best chance possible to quickly conquer that risk. Doesn't your intuition tell you that it's not right that the only solutions presented in mainstream media are through pharmaceutical drugs or injections? Nothing based in natural or time-tested traditional health. hopefully you're starting to understand why. Again, there is no money in natural solutions. There is no money in a healthy person. So most all of our policies, COVID policies, could be looked at as very unhealthy directives. There was no reason or plan for optimism that was given, right? All the news was just like doom and gloom every night. Never was there an end date or how we were going to get through this. Never was there talk of therapeutics to help out so that we weren't so fearful. Proactive measures that we could take on our immune system to make it stronger. It was always just the injection, right? Wait for the injection. Most of our local policy leaders told people to be fearful, stay home, literally writing in their local ordinances and press conferences, quote, avoid fitness centers, right? Which again is presented as for your safety, right? Avoid them because there's other people there and you may get sick. But a lot of times these messages weren't accompanied with other ways to have exercise, the importance of exercise, everything else. And I think a lot of people, when it comes to dire situations, we want leaders with courage and composure. I want someone telling me that it's going to be okay. Hey, don't be afraid. Here's the plan. Here's how we're going to get through this. We got this. We can do this. This world went from 15 days to slow the spread to you're crazy and or censored if you speak out against us, all the way to you're potentially and probably fired if you don't get the injection, to sometimes even your bank accounts are frozen if you protest against us. I know that happened to some Canadian truckers. That just doesn't make sense. If those policies were really rooted in science and those leaders were secure in their beliefs, then why did those mainstream medical professionals always refuse to debate with other doctors or other policy leaders who saw differently from them? We had Nobel Prize winning scientists and professors from Harvard, Stanford, Oxford. Many of these doctors were getting censored and called crazy. Why not just have a friendly civil debate? Talk about what supposedly is easy and convincing science, right? Why did that not occur? Why did they not ever do that? Maybe, just maybe, because everything was not truly rooted in science. Maybe it's because our centralized agencies that were running the show absolutely forbid any dissent from what they said. And when, ask yourself, when in history have the people censoring or hiding information, when have they ever been the good guys, right? We talked about in episode 2, the leadership I tried to provide during COVID, running a business that the city tried to shut down because we operated without fear, as well as creating what was called Kansas City Rebirth, where I got business owners to sign up with me to seek unity with local policy and industry leaders. We wrote about our policy leaders. We wrote to them, I guess. Did a press release. I got interviewed by the local media about it. And even though the policy leaders did not respond to us, just like I said a moment ago, they didn't respond really to anyone who disagreed with them or challenged them to a debate, that soon after our initiative's deadline to our local policy leaders, our local face mask mandate actually was lifted. So we did feel we had some impact there. But ultimately, we just wanted to have a discussion, put together a plan of hope, of optimism, courage, composure, to navigate through adversity, provide guidance, be strong, recognize the collateral damage that was being done in the process. You may ask, what collateral damage? What are you talking about? Well, we know now that business closures and lost jobs was a tremendous collateral damage of our policies that we put into place. It's been said that over 50% of family-owned businesses, mom and pop type of places, closed. That's a travesty. We all know that those years increased depression, anxiety, addiction, caused missed medical care appointments, opioid overdoses, suicides, increased rates of all of these, right? Psychological, mental health issues, especially in children, affecting their ability to learn and grow mentally and physically. It's been said that children's scores and development have been set back for like 2 years when it comes to their educational system and how much their learning and development has been stunted. We also know collateral damage that telling people to stay home, sometimes home is not the safest place for someone to be. When you think of domestic abuse, child abuse, unfortunately, that is the sad truth that sometimes getting out of the home is the best thing that people have going for them right now. So all this collateral damage and these negative outcomes, they're cases and deaths too. And they deserved equal consideration. We wanted to just have a public conversation about them. When we talk about the emotion of the moment, I've said before, I believe in the moral and intellectual capacity of people to make the right decisions, given all the information. We talked about that at episode 1. And as you reflect on it, just recognize again how much of that news during that time was pessimistic, negative, fear-based. Acknowledge how we've been through 3 major fear-based life shock events in the last 19 years, 9/11, 2008 housing financial crisis, COVID, or at least, as of 2020, it was 19 years. And they scared us each time and continue to put fear in a lot of different ways, including a link that shows how every year or two, they pump new fear about a new virus. Headline, the cover of Time magazine, how fearful we should be about a new virus. There's unquestionable promotion of excessive fear, in my opinion. And we, as humans, we burn a lot of fuel navigating through these adverse events, these skyfall events. And as humans, we also desire resiliency, safety, certainty. We're programmed in that way. We want resiliency to future adversity. But look, when it comes to adversity, it's always going to be there on some level. We're never going to have absolute safety. Living a safe life was not certain prior to 2020. In fact, the cold hard truth is living life has never been a certainty and never will. You never know how any health condition is going to affect you. More importantly, in trying to avoid an infection or a health condition is limiting how harmful that could be to you if it does happen. So there's several ways you can go about keeping yourself as healthy as possible so that if it does happen, you're through it. But instead, those headlines were sensational throughout that time, consistently sending lower vibration messages of fear, division, putting a collection of clips about how much pressure was put on everybody. It's a great one. You should really watch this one. Just again, how much fear, how much it was drilled into us to trust the science. Science is truth. Literally, do what you're told and don't do your own research. I mean, these things were said on mainstream TV over and over. But some of you may not know and are learning today that the common flu, influenza A, has over 130 variants. And each variant only differs by its base virus at most by 0.03%, not 3%, 0.03%. Each variant. So our bodies know this. Our bodies know these things that go through and impact our body. We remember them. So let's be realistic about that. Let's not be afraid. And let's recognize that a lot of times it's a choice between something your body has never seen, like an injection of many different chemicals inside that injection, versus something your body has seen, 90+% during your lifetime. It recognizes 90 plus, 99% of the sequential structure. Think about that comparison. Don't allow pessimism to dominate your consciousness. Conquer your own thought process. Honor your mind's research and reason, and recognize, be true to your own intuition. Trust your body that you have taken well care of. So yeah, that constant pessimism and fear pushed at us during those years was very frustrating and excessive. And when it comes to science and authority, let's talk about, quote, the science. All of that talk of science is real and trust the science. Science is truth. Carl Sagan had a quote on science that science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking. Another way of saying it, that a scientist isn't simply someone with credentials or degrees. It's someone who approaches a topic with appropriate scientific methods, testing and questioning. That science is theories and disproving theories. And therefore, if you aren't allowed to question it, then it's not science. How many people think, quote, science is determined by the credentials behind the person speaking, right? The slandering and the discrediting of people simply because they don't have the right credentials behind their name. How often that happened, rather than by the process used to present the conclusion or stance. That's what science should be. Hey, tell me that process. Tell me a scientific reasoning and process that you got to that conclusion, which to me is a huge feather in the cap of natural healers, as they often work more on knowledge and experience than they do on narratives or noise from media or dissenters. It is about that approach. It is about the testing. It is about the questioning. We all deal with scientific theory on a regular basis. We all gauge risk on a regular basis. As adults and especially as children, we are constantly testing things out and learning. which is exactly what science is supposed to operate as. So if you say you believe in science, but yet don't take the time to walk through the scientific justification that brought you to that conclusion, then it's not that you believe in science, it's that you believe in Santa Claus. And that Santa Claus is the only person that can bring you presents. Santa, in this instance, being what has been positioned to be authoritative figures or mainstream news, bodies of organization like three-letter agencies, etc. You know, these folks who constantly tell you not to question certain things unless it comes from them. You are blissfully choosing not to go through those adult Santa Claus effect moments. And the sooner you find out Santa Claus isn't real, the sooner you will be able to get on with your life with more stable energy levels and better health. You can say you believe in science, or many of you did say that, and now it's been proven that the whole 6 feet apart thing was totally made up. Dr. Fauci said that in Congress. He testified in front of Congress that it just appeared. Quote, "It was not based in science and it just appeared." Fauci also under oath said the lockdown measures were not backed up by science. And in fact, there's a great compilation video I'll put in the show notes of Fauci contradicting himself several times over throughout that time frame. Masking, face mask, was not based in science. They're proven to do a certain function and scientifically proven not to airborne particles. Just read the print on the boxes. Other things that people talked about science back in the day, that natural immunity was no good, right? But Fauci himself, I'll put another clip in there. Back in the day, this is old Fauci, 1980s, 1990s Fauci, telling the truth about natural immunity and how if someone had the flu, they have developed natural immunity to that flu. Trust the Science told us that COVID came from bats, right? Jumped to humans, which now a lab leak is the prevailing theory. Trust the Science said the injections will stop the spread of COVID, but Pfizer actually had to admit that the injections were never tested to stop transmission, even though all the experts said it would. And, just look at Portugal, led the world in cases after being essentially fully injected. So how does that make sense? Well, we'll talk about that here in a minute with cases. And even Bill Gates himself said in May 2022 that the vaccines don't have much in the way of duration and they're not good at infection blocking. But yet, quote, the science at the early part of it told us that was the only thing you should believe in, that believing anything else was a conspiracy theory. It's just like Iraq, right? WMDs, trust the experts, or Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. Trust the experts saying that. There's Dr. Stephen Homburg from Germany came out and spoke how there were no more severe respiratory illnesses during 2020 and 2021 than there were any other year. They were just classified a different way. Yet throughout all of this, there was still a big push, and it almost happened, to implement essentially a new agency that would fight misinformation that was jokingly called the Ministry of Truth, to reference the famous Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's famous 1984 book, where totalitarianism was on full display. So the whole idea of science and authority has been very much abused, and we need to learn from that and not ever let that happen again. So we talk about cases, and we wonder how they pulled this off. What are these cases? They're done using these PCR tests, driving fear, all these case counts on the TV sets into people's minds. Then they got tested. I got tested. I'm positive now. And now I have this fear of anticipation, more fear, which is unhealthy for the immune system. What a PCR test does, you can look this up. Again, please do look up all of this stuff. Do your own research. A PCR test works by amplifying a specimen over and over and over, looking for this certain molecular sequence, and that each amplification looks closer and closer and closer until it finds that molecular sequence. The inventor of the PCR test, Kary Mullis, who actually won a Nobel Prize because of that invention, said that these PCR tests can essentially find anything in anybody, and that they're not supposed to be used as a diagnostic tool. Kary Mullis oddly died in 2019, right before the pandemic started, but we won't go into that. But anyway, so we use these rapid tests, right? They would be sent to a lab, and the lab then would run them through what's called these cycles. They're just looking closer and closer and closer at each specimen drilling down farther and farther until it tries to find this sequence. Those levels, the more they go closer and closer, they're called cycle thresholds. A lot of the labs back in the day set the cycle threshold at 35, 40, even higher. Well, Fauci himself is on record of saying that cycle thresholds higher than 35 are essentially meaningless. That I think he called it, they are replication incompetent, which means they cannot replicate and therefore they're nothing to worry about. But if the lab is testing it at that higher level, then boom, it's a case positive. Boom, that means it's a COVID positive case. Boom, it goes on the TV, and boom, it puts more fear into people's minds. So these PCR tests alone, by the fact that they were getting tested and used in this way, should have disqualified them from driving any public policy, certainly banned from media campaigns that use them to justify fear. But then, this is going to be a big eye-opening for a lot of folks. It came out that they were sequenced against not a strain of COVID-19, but against the common cold. That the FDA admitted the PCR tests were not calibrated from an isolated strain of COVID-19, because I said no samples of COVID-19 existed. That's weird. But instead were calibrated on a strain of the common cold, effectively admitting that it was testing for something else. And it was ironically the same day that they came out with that statement that they came out, this is July 21st, 2021, that they came out and said, oh, by the end of the year, January 1st, 2022 or December 31st, 2021, by the end of the year, PCR tests could no longer be used for COVID testing because they cannot tell the difference between COVID and other flus or colds. So I'm pausing here. I'm going to keep this pause in here. That is why we had the case hysteria that we did. So these tests were used to drive up numbers as much as possible. Just like it technically takes 14 days for the authorities, 14 days after a second injection to be considered fully vaccinated. So any case, PCR test, or any death between the first injection and the second injection is actually labeled a unvaccinated case or death. Yet any positive PCR test around death or even after death, regardless of the cause of death, like car accident or even suicide, that COVID was put on a death certificate and therefore marked as a COVID death. So these trackers, that case trackers and death trackers, you can see how they got manipulated and how they could be used to drive fear. Just imagine for a moment, instead of cases of a flu virus constantly on a TV screen, if they had trackers of how many millions of kids go missing throughout the world. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's 3 more. Right? Maybe that would put some fear and focus into fixing that issue, but that's a story for another day. We cannot become villains for something out of our control. Being asymptomatic was one of the biggest drivers of fear and the reasons for face masks, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But there was a study of 10 million people that could not prove asymptomatic transmission. It's just really impossible. Again, it's an invisible enemy. If you don't have it yet, how can you prove and trace it back to someone else? So I'm not saying it exists. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. But this study of 10 million people, and this was early June 2020, showed that asymptomatic transmission was not a thing. And the WHO came out and said it. But then the very next day, they had to come out and they had to backtrack because they realized, oh my gosh, what we just said was that asymptomatic transmission is not a thing, and therefore healthy people should not have to wear face masks, would be the natural conclusion. So they had to do wordmanship to the press release. They didn't recant the study. They just reformatted the press release so that authorities could continue to claim that face masks were needed and that we had to keep living our lives in fear and being scared of other people and healthy people. But we live and breathe in the presence of others, folks, all the time. Think about going to a bar or a party or family gathering. How often we stand around talking to each other with open drinks or an open plate of food. Think of the billions of microorganisms transferred during that time. I'm sure, like me, a lot of people know times where you're talking to somebody and you see like little pieces of spit fly out of their mouth. Those are clear examples, and then you have the examples that aren't noticeable to the common eye. Again, it's billions of particles are transferred all the time between human bodies. And our bodies have adapted to that over many, many, many years. We know and exchange these fluids. That's how we recognize them, and that's how we build up immunity to them. But the best example of how we can't live in a sterile environment, even though we think we are, is going to a restaurant and you sit down and you order and you're like, all right, great. Can't wait for the food to come. And then you go to the restroom and you wash your hands. All right, I'm going to eat this food with clean hands. Well, then you get back to the table, your food comes, and you start grabbing everything on the table that you can grab. Salt shakers, pepper shakers, the menu again to look at it. And all of those things were grabbed by people before you. So your clean hands are now contaminated, so to say, with these germs. But don't think of it as contamination. Again, these things are all around us. And if all these germs were out there are supposed to kill us, it would have done so by now. They don't, all right? It's our incredible bodies that we keep talking about that are keeping us healthy. So let's talk about face mask for a moment. Obviously, just wearing a mask produces a lot of fear. For the effectiveness, we talked about just looking on the box. It says that it doesn't do anything with airborne particles. Surgeons have always known why they wear a mask and why they don't. It stops droplets of saliva from dropping into open wounds during surgery and potentially causing an infection. It's not to stop anything airborne. But I'm going to attach 2 pictures that are really all you need to see when it comes to how a face mask does not stop airborne particles. Your air still goes somewhere. It's not like it's a vacuum. So again, our bodies, we exchange all this stuff, and our bodies even need healthy bacteria. Our immune systems we need bacteria in our gut to be actively functioning. And it would be psychologically harmful and impossible to try and live in a sterile environment and avoid all microorganisms. Impossible and psychologically drive you mad. Besides that picture, I am also going to include an aggregate list of many studies and resources that from many, many years on how face masks don't work. And you can say, yeah, you can find your stuff online. I can show you other stuff. Well, mostly the big difference here is that these studies match up with historical data, and any studies showing that face masks do work have been brought out just in the last couple of years, and funded by those entities who want to keep driving that narrative, So just know widespread, multidimensional research will give you the right answer. I'm going to include some graphs about countrywide mask mandates showing they did nothing to stop the spread. I'm going to include videos of hypocrisy from public officials. That was one of the big things, right? Is these people who were telling us to do something, we would find that they wouldn't be doing that in their own life, including a scene from a press conference where the whole room put their mask on right before the cameras started rolling. I mean, it's comical. But this is a point that I feel is really important. Remember or know that it had to be a court of law to end the airport mask mandates. The courts had to finally declare them unconstitutional. Otherwise, we would have been wearing them perpetually, right? Because we would have kept telling them for our safety. But finally, a court said, no, you can't do this. And everybody ripped them off right away. I mean, you went from 95+% of people wearing them in airports and airplanes to, 5%, 10% maybe. And guess what happened? Hardly anything. Were all these super spreaders, or did the COVID apocalypse happen once that airline mandate got shut down? No, it didn't. Again, just starkly proving that they did nothing to stop the spread. You may wonder, why didn't that court's decision ever get overruled, right? That's what happens. We have these checks and balances in our courts. Why didn't it get overruled? Well, the reason it didn't get overruled, because the only way it could have gotten overruled is people would have had to prove in a court of law that face masks work, that they stop the spread, which they cannot do in a court of law. So know that, folks. Understand that. That's what happened there. And also know that it was because of those people you call crazies or, conspiracy theorists, those people that you got mad at because they weren't wearing face masks. It was because they courageously persisted and stayed strong in what they knew to be right. and pushed and pushed and pushed until they finally got their case in front of a court of law, that you have to thank for not still wearing masks. And maybe most importantly on face masks is that they were never designed to be worn for a long period of time. That ever doing so can actually harm you more than help you. There is a study I'm attaching that shows how many contaminants get caught in a face mask. And then you are then breathing in all those contaminants. As well as a link to a study from Fauci himself, who co-authored the study on the danger of wearing masks due to the, quote, predominant role of bacterial pneumonia as a cause of death in influenza. So they should not be worn for a long period of time. They restrict the flow of oxygen. You can say no, but the reason that proves that they do restrict the flow of oxygen is because you can see that every single mask mandate that came out had a clause in there that said it did not apply to anyone with respiratory conditions. Because, of course, it does affect the flow of air and oxygen. So after hearing all of this about masks, looking at doing your own research, if you still want to wear a mask, fine, wear one. All right. Just don't judge others for not wearing one. Don't wear it for very long. And when you wear it, treat it I call it basically dynamite. Treat it as if it's dynamite. Never touch it with your hands. Never move it around. Because then if you do, you're just defeating the main purpose of the mask, just like touching that salt shaker. All right, on to viruses. So given we've talked about a lot of shaky science, let's talk about viruses. There's a video, I think it's about 20 minutes long, that I highly recommend you watch because I want to lead off with a doctor, right? And Dr. David Martin did an incredible presentation to the European Union, putting all the pieces together about just kind of viruses themselves, the build up to where we are today, pharmaceutical reach into viruses, and all the patents on viruses. Do you know that all these viruses have patents on them? Why is that? And remember, we talked about earlier those electricity studies chronicled in the Invisible Rainbow book that produce similar symptoms as cold and flus. So it makes you wonder, is it a virus that's going on? Are viruses contagious? And I'll point you to a big study that was done during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, 1919. They did human experiments conducted by Public Health Service and the U.S. Navy under the supervision of Milton Rosenau on Gallops Island, the quarantine station in Boston Harbor, and Angel Island, its counterpart in San Francisco. It began with 100 volunteers from the Navy who had no history of influenza. Those volunteers received one strain and then several strains of the flu by spray and swabs into their noses and throats and then into their eyes. So, they literally put contaminated swabs into their noses and throats, and those procedures failed to produce disease. They monitored them for several days. It failed to produce any disease. So then others were inoculated with mixtures of organisms from patients themselves. They literally swabbed patients who were sick at that time and put them into healthy people, and those too failed to produce disease. Next, some of the volunteers received injections of blood from influenza patients, and even some of them were taken into an influenza ward and exposed to the patients themselves, like literally shaking hands with the patient, talking to them at close range, permitting them to cough directly into their face. That was part of the study. I'm not joking. And those too failed to produce disease. Just makes you wonder. Also makes you wonder why some people get sick in a household and others do not, or why some people never seem to get sick, especially those people who seem to live a big wellness life, natural-based life. They say, well, those people, they either got the greatest luck in the world or they possess a strong immune system. That's why they don't get sick, right? Well, considering for a moment that it's not maybe the greatest luck in the world and that it likely is that they possess a strong immune system, shouldn't that be a call to increase your immune health by observing and applying what those people do? We looked at it that way. So then you may ask, well, Heath, why does it seem sometimes that they can be contagious? Well, there's a lot of reasons. First off, let me just say there's other things that are contagious, right? That we don't quite fully understand. Yawning, right? People yawn and then other people around, we yawn too. That seems to be contagious. Laughter, that's contagious. Or you've probably heard, women's menstrual cycles, they can synchronize around each other when they're with each other for a long time. So we don't fully understand those things. When it comes to realizing flu or cold symptoms, why that can appear contagious is there's a lot of factors that can contribute to an illness. Biological processes always happening in our body, shared exposure to environmental conditions or psychological changes that we encounter while living out moments of our life. And again, I'm going to quote Alec again. He listed off a lot of them. Think about a winter lifestyle versus a spring lifestyle and what our bodies do in winter time frames where we can't go outside as often versus what we do in spring time frames, and how the body reacts to that and cleanses itself. We talked earlier about cleaning agents in homes. Personal care products and cleaning products that we use can be used by each other and therefore pass on the same type of toxicity. Same with chemical heavy foods and tap water. Same with shared fear and emotional stress. If that's existing between a group of people, that's impairing their body's ability to detoxify and repair itself at the same time. That can appear contagious. Even electricity, internet, Wi-Fi, EMF. Your body responds to external environmental stressors like electricity. We've talked about that a few times here. Finally, there's an effect that belief alone causes negative health effects. And there's been a lot of medical studies that show this, that even when a placebo is given, if it's done under a pretext that they were given something bad, that they believe the bad thing and manifest the consequences or the effects of the bad thing. So think about here, a PCR test that was ran at a cycle threshold of 45 telling you are positive, and now you sit at home for 3 to 7 days and just fret and worry and don't get any sunlight and don't take care of your immune system and think about how your body's going to get sick. You're basically manifesting those symptoms in your body. So there's a lot of different ways of why it can seem contagious. And given all of this, what am I saying? Heath, are you saying viruses aren't real? I don't know. All right. I'm not saying they are. I'm not saying they're not. It's obviously kind of hard to prove either way, given they're down at such a small level that it's kind of like another invisible enemy. And if it was so easy to prove, we'd all be united. There wouldn't be any controversy. But where I try to predominantly reside in is just a stance of concern over, again, using invisible enemies as a fear tactic and as a driver of these massive public policy changes or justifications for losses of liberty or division between us. So again, openly explore all these observations, perspectives, studies, references, resources with curiosity. Just do not fear. All right, do not fear. Finally, on injections, and vaccines, first, do I believe that a weakened or inactive particle can produce an immune response to that particle and therefore produce some protection for later on should that threat be encountered again? Yes. Unequivocally, yes. I most certainly do believe in that. But that immune response also happens many other ways other than injections, especially when we're young and we get exposed to all sorts of things. So beyond antibodies, we have T cells and B cells and tonsils that do an incredible job of entering these threats into the body's entry log and preparing for any of those threats later on in life, especially as kids. I mean, those tonsils, that's what tonsils do as kids. Those tonsils and adenoids are such an important part of your immune system. Think of all the stuff kids put into their mouth and all that they encounter. Your body's just going through such a learning process at that time, a curiosity phase, but internally, your body is learning about external threats, and it's then programming them through algorithms to help that body later on when threats similar to them are introduced. So we talked earlier about face mask fear and the courts stopping airlines from acquiring them. Pretty similar here. If the injection had not come out as quickly as it did, basically in a year from the initial onslaught of health crisis, what would have happened? If it took the usual 5 to 7 to 10 years that these vaccines usually take, is it possible we would have been locked down for 5, 7, maybe 10 years? Let me ask, would you have allowed that to happen? Would you have allowed that life to happen? Would you have allowed yourself to think that for multiple years, that you would have had to stay inside to be safe? So let's just take these injections in general. The general flu shot There was a great study, researchers who tracked national data on flu vax rates and mortality in elderly people from 1968 through 2001 said they could find no evidence that flu shots reduced death rates. CBS actually covered the story in 2006. Reporter Cheryl Atkinson reported at that time that no matter how they crunched the numbers, they got the same disappointing result. Flu shots have not reduced deaths among the elderly. Supposedly that reporter later left mainstream news and became an independent journalist focused on exposing big pharma and government corruption and mainstream lies. But that's not the main point here. The main point is there are real studies, and it has been covered in the news. I'm also attaching a picture of a baby that has all these needles around them. It's a very eye-opening picture of all the shots that they are set to receive from the CDC schedule, which is now around 70 shots before 18 years old. In 1983, it was less than or around 10 shots. 30 or 40 of those 70 are before they're 2 years old. And then after 18 years old, another 130 are on the CDC schedule as an adult up to 79 years young. So essentially, the CDC recommends like 200 injections in your lifetime in order to keep you healthy. But I think it's way more healthy to think of how our bodies are not deficient. We are not born deficient. And just like too much antibiotics, prescribing antibiotics too often is not good for your body. Most doctors will tell you that. It's same with prednisone, same with narcotics, right? Like prescribing those things over and over is not good for the body. It's going to prime the body too much. Same thing with injections. Our body should not get primed that often. So I linked to all those vaccine schedules in that picture. We talked in the first episode that the goal of a lot of the flow of information is not necessarily to get you to believe lies, but to get you to not believe anything. You know, they don't want you to believe that there's no trusted system out there to track injection injuries. And in fact, there is a system. It's not perfect. It's called VAERS. There's a website that pulls data from this system and presents it in a digestible format because it is a tough system to read. And I heard that's getting worked on by the current HHS agency. But still, people reject any reports of injuries from injections, saying we can't trust it or we can't directly tie that injury to that injection. But given the number of recommended shots on this ever-growing CDC schedule, I would think a common sense hesitation should at least tell you there's no way that the gold standard of testing, again, double-blinded, placebo-based trials, can be performed long-term effects on that many variables. 30, 40, 70, 200 variables? No, there's no way you can perform long-term gold standard trials on effects that would occur. Therefore, you have to consider, with respect, people who say they have been injured by an injection. And there's another link that I'll show that these childhood shots on the schedule haven't had these long-term safety studies because there's really no way you can do it. But yet a lot of us think that these are safe because they're putting on the CDC schedule. But it is shown that there has not been sufficient safety studies done on these shots. It's sad, but it's true. It's an adult Santa Claus effect moment, big time one, that you got to walk through, you got to realize, and you got to then decide what you think is best for you, your children, and those you care about. Again, it's not about one specific shot or one specific ingredient in the shots. There's so many in there. Again, I talked about, do I believe that an inactive particle can produce an immune response? Yes, but these shots are not just one particle. There's so many chemicals inside of them. And all we're asking is to just try to consider, why is it that we have this increase in all these health issues, right? And are these injections playing a significant role in causing childhood issues? Asthma, allergic dermatitis, ADD, food allergies, infertility, yes, even autism. Remember, investigations, that's all conspiracy theorists want. We talked about that in episode 1, that replace conspiracy theory with someone who wants an investigation. That should be important to everybody. Our children, the health of our children should be important to everybody. There are studies that show, that I'll link here, that kids who did not get shots as kids grew up healthier. They had less issues than those who did. And same with autism. I mean, there's a map of the spectrum disorder rates by country, and you'll notice that the higher rates are in the countries with the higher rates of shots and injections, the USA, Canada. as well as other studies that show correlation. You can believe the study or not. It's up to you. It's totally fine, but don't say there's no studies out there. That's what they want. They want you to confuse. They want you to think that there's no way we can draw a correlation between these shots and these health issues. As for the COVID shot specifically, there were a lot of effective options out there from day one to help the symptoms or people navigate the symptoms through COVID. They didn't want that. It was always about getting to the injection. We mentioned earlier, no other hope or option. It's the only thing we got to march towards. Just wait for that date when it comes out. When's it going to come out? There also was a little known rule, another Adult Santa Claus Effect moment here, that you cannot issue an emergency use authorization for a shot if there is an existing remedy that has already been approved for any use of that health issue. So if there's a health issue out there, a new one, and there's remedies that help with it, the authorities cannot grant an EUA, an emergency use authorization, for a injection. And that's why any remedy was not talked about. Anything that did come up, like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, was vilified, because if, quote, they admitted that any of those were effective, then the FDA could not have granted that EUA to start using the shots, because otherwise you would have had to go through those 7 to 10 years of normal testing. In fact, you can see that the FDA had to settle a lawsuit by backtracking all of their social media posts that they put out on ivermectin over those years, because they were not based in science. I'll put that link in here as well. There's some clips I'll put in here about people talking about how there was a pandemic coming. Again, I know they scare it with us every couple of years, but this one specifically, there was a lot of lead up towards this time frame. And the reason why a lot of this was able to happen is because it really funneled up to just some top places, some 3-letter agencies where a few people controlled those levers getting pulled. Everybody from local health departments down to store owners, they would always say, right, well, I'm just complying with the CDC, WHO guidelines, right? They were never putting accountability on themselves to explain their own scientific justification for doing what they're doing. It was always just like, well, that's because we're complying with those places. Well, if those places are just controlled by a few, then we essentially just had a few running the world during that time. And we know that those 3-letter agencies receive so much funds and lobbying from the pharmaceutical and vaccine industries. I mean, that's just not, they don't hide that. And of course, they're in their pockets really deep. Ultimately, again, common sense tells you that a real health crisis doesn't need advertising or marketing or incentives or bribes or coercion to go get the magic solution for it. We would just know that, hey, that health crisis is real, it's legit, I need to do something about it. We said we talk about consent more, informed consent, having civil, well-rounded Q&A sessions. So, why get why didn't we have more talks about, well, why should I get this if it doesn't stop transmission? Or why should I get this if it doesn't give me lasting immunity? Or what is the medical necessity there to get this right now when there's no long-term safety data? Or why get it if it just, allegedly reduces the severity of symptoms? There's a great video compilation you'll see in the show notes that shows that the marketing started out as safe and effective, 100% effective even. And it just went down from there. I mean, down through the 90s, down through the 80s, 70%, 60% effective, 50%, all the way down. And that's where they just constantly changed the narrative. But it was done over time that you didn't quite see that. You didn't notice that. And so at the end of the day, why risk an experiment when you have 99% plus survival rate or bodily awareness to it without that experiment? Imagine instead of those death counts, those trackers again, talking about all the deaths that were going up. Imagine the headline being survival rate drops from 99.8% to 99.7%. Imagine that being the big headline. Well, that was the headline. It just was done with different numbers. But at the end of the day, the survival rate was still extremely high. Do you see the difference in perspective there? It's been talked about Bill Gates. He has a big hand in this. And of course, we're positioned by these authorities as being a medical expert, even though he didn't have those credentials behind his name. He wasn't a doctor. But it was pointed out how he bought over 1 million shares of stock in these pharma industries and injection industries before COVID happened. He actually talked about it on TV and talked about how it was the greatest investment he made. Then he sold all that stock almost 2 years later at a $242 million profit. And then immediately after that, started going on and admitting that the vaccine didn't work like we originally said it did or was going to work. So that is very clear. You can look all of that up yourself if you want. But another thing about the whole idea of injections that should make you very, very cautious is the fact that the manufacturers have complete liability protection from any harm that it could cause. Yeah, that's right. They're not liable. You can't sue them. That came from an act in 1986. It's called the Act of 1986. I'll put links to it. That gave liability protection to pharmaceutical companies on these vaccines. Therefore, really allowed the CDC schedule to take off after that. Just think about how only the government could use your own money to sign a deal with a company to manufacture a drug like they did in COVID, as well as grant the manufacturer immunity from liability if anything goes wrong with that drug, which they did through this act, and then go and punish you for not taking the drug, which they try to do through all the employer measures to force their employees on taking that shot. I mean, just think about that. Where does that make sense? But when it's done strategically through wordmanship, through messaging, through that flow of information that we talked about in episode 1, it can be done. I raised an eyebrow. I don't know if you heard, Pfizer originally asked for 75 years to release all the data gathered during their clinical trials. 75 years. Thankfully, a court denied them that request. But why would they want to wait that long before telling us? This coming from a company that a court fined $2.3 billion, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in the history of the Department of Justice. So a lot of things with injections that you really need to reconsider. And as for the COVID one specifically, Kansas and other states are now suing for false and misleading marketing that occurred. Multiple states are pushing to ban the injections. It's been said these injections have this controversial SV40 gene that the HCA itself says is a known carcinogen. And Pfizer admits on their own site that they include it, but they say it's a non-infectious fraction of a sequence of that SV40, which I don't know if I would trust that. That seems a little strange, or kind of seems like wordmanship there. Also raise an eyebrow when the CEO of Facebook tells employees not to take that experimental injection, but then goes and censors people through the technology of the company on that platform who claim otherwise. And then, if you saw, recently admitted to feeling bad that he got pushed around and let the previous administration push him around on this. I don't know if you also saw the former CDC director who was in charge during the COVID years now says that, quote, long COVID very possibly is another term for vaccine injured. So I know there's a lot of doctors who say this. These are tough truths, folks. They're tough, really tough truths. Whistleblowers came out and said how the military's medical tracking system went from a 5-year average of cancer statistic to over 3 times the amount in 2021. Then after that information got out, they had to go back and say, oh, it was just a glitch. Something happened where that wasn't with the data. That wasn't the case. How often do we hear glitches, right? When something goes horribly wrong and we wonder how in the world did that happen? And the answer is a glitch. So it's hard to scientifically prove with statistics that the COVID injection, caused any good. You can say that it's hard to produce any statistics that it caused bad. I know it's hard to prove correlation, right? That's what they want. But, even the New York Times wrote an article titled "Thousands Believe That the COVID Injections Harm Them. Is anyone listening to them?" There's just a lot of people who speak out. They get media to cover it sometimes. They speak out through social posts, speak out. There's a group on Telegram, COVID BC. You can go to X and follow Too Baffled, or search on X for, these type of injuries. There's compilations of all these athletes who have had heart issues and fallen over on the pitch. It's tough stuff, folks. I don't know. But again, there's doctors who are coming out with these studies, and there's real people who are reporting correlation, and we should not blindly dismiss them. Look, I'm not claiming that, and I don't want to think that any authority would intentionally harm us, all right? I don't want to live in that world. But I can want it not to be true, but that doesn't make it not true. Think about the perspective and fact of there have been harmful things that have been done to us in history, like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, like how we used to use and spray DEET all over our communities, how we used to use asbestos, how we used to think tobacco was fine. Maybe we didn't know at that time. Maybe we did. Maybe some authorities did know, but they kept pushing it. Johnson & Johnson put a baby powder out to market before they found out it was cancerous. They're also currently under a lawsuit for the opioid crisis. I don't know if they willingly, intentionally, knowingly did this, but either way, I feel they have lost our trust. However, again, this episode, this whole podcast series is rooted in best health, optimism, unity. It's important that we have that positivity. If you made the decision to get the shot and this topic makes you feel uncomfortable, just take some breaths and do not fear, all right? Always comes back to that. And breath work is so important to the body. You're going to hear it in the top 10 list. There's even a study I'll cite here that shows that cigarette smokers had a lower clinical risk factor than people who did not smoke cigarettes. And the prevailing theory of why that is because smokers simply took time out of their day to consciously breathe. So remember that when you're wondering how important breath work is. Ultimately, though, stay positive, stay encouraged. What matters most is that you take care of your body now in the best way possible through proactive wellness lifestyle choices, including removing stress and worry and fear from your life. Let's stay united on living our best lives, choosing to live our most healthy life. Choosing a life of wellness is the best sustainable long-term path ahead for all health risk. Your body is incredible. I hope we've shown that to you. And given the right conditions, it will cleanse and heal and sustain you. If you are curious, there are detox types of options out there if you want from the injection and for a lot of different detoxes. You can also consider a D-dimer test, which supposedly can be an early detector of your potential risk of blood clotting. So if you're interested in finding out any of these detox options, feel free to reach out to me, book a session with me. We can discuss further. I'm happy to talk to you about these on an individual level. Happy to point you to resources that you can consider, talk about with your team of doctors, do your own research on. I also have a similar list for alternative treatments to cancer than if you don't want to go down the invasive chemo and radiation route. But again, all this is really serious stuff. You shouldn't just be throwing this stuff around. It deserves respect where respect is due. All right, so we have reached the point where many of you probably wanted to get to, and some of you maybe just fast forwarded to. All right, tell me what I can do. What's the easiest way I can get to be best health? So we're going to go through a top 10, but as I go through this and start and launch into it, I want you to remember, again, some falsehoods or perceptions that many of us have with our daily actions and mindsets, because it's going to take a mindset shift to live your best life. Doesn't mean it's going to be hard, doesn't mean it's going to be more expensive, but it's going to be a mindset shift. And there's some good examples about money-wise that I'll share with you here. People think a $6 Starbucks drink is nothing, and they'll do that every day, but spending $6 for a half gallon of raw, nutritious milk is absurd. There's people who think spending $20 on a craft cocktail is just part of going out, but spending $20 on a chicken who's been eating fresh, all the fresh stuff that chickens eat and roam freely and given the best chance to produce the healthiest eggs is too expensive. There's people who think spending $200 on a new purse or new shoes is nothing, but spending $200 on a water filter is uncalled for, not necessary. Or another one, spending $400 on really big concert or festival tickets is just part of what needs to happen because we love music, which I do love music too, versus spending $400 on a local CSA share and a cow that will last you many months or even a whole year, feed you, is something you can't wrap your head around and can't get on board with. So it's all about perspective, right? Again, you're either investing in your wellness or you're investing in your illness. So last thing I'll say before I go through the top 10 here is, remember, everyone's different. And we can go much deeper than this, and I can go much deeper with you and cover a lot more in my wellness coaching sessions. But here's what I've learned from my experience, my research, my own application as the easiest steps that provide the most value, all right? So I'm going to run through them quickly, and then I'll go through each one more in depth. Number one, stress. Be aware of your usual stressors and reduce overall stress. Number 2, mindfully eat as much diverse, fresh, healthy, local, natural food as possible. I know it seems like a lot, but eat healthy and when you're hungry. Number 3, move often and move well. All right. Number 4, drink the right amount of clean, non-tap water throughout the day. Number 5, find time for breath work. Number 6, rest and recover. So important. Number 7, receive sunlight. Be out in nature. Don't be scared of the sun. Number 8, sleep with the windows open and or get fresh air as often as possible. Kind of like number 7, but not quite because you're inside, right? Number 9, this is has been a huge one for me in the last couple of years. Turn off all audible phone notifications except for phone calls. And number 10, find time to connect to the earth. Do grounding. So number 1, be aware of your usual stressors, reduce overall stress. Few things are truly that important to get you so worked up in life. Don't be afraid. How many times have we talked about this in this episode? We talked about it. You know, if you're a Christian, the Bible says fear not more than anything else. Talk about that more in episode number 5. So practice this when you're out there. Take a break, change scenery, change your working location, give your eyes and mind a rest. Don't allow things to build up. Practice gratitude, no matter how big or small. Think of any good news that happened that day. Anything that went your way that could not have. Think of something good, or find time to meditate and reflect. And if you cannot or don't want to meditate, just at least reflect. Right? And meditation doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as quick and simple as taking a few conscious breaths or even one breath. I call it the windshield wiper breath, where you're just clearing your mind from what moment and energy you just came from, and you're entering that next moment with fresh energy, with no preconceptions or judgment. Laughing, genuine laughing. It's a great way to remove stress. Gamification. Healthy competitiveness is very healthy. There was a keynote speaker at the Cerner Health Conference in 2008 that I thought did a great job just showing how that never leaves us. As adults, we still share that love of gamification as we did as a kid. And so designing parts of your life to have that fun aspect, that little gamification aspect, very beneficial. So challenge yourself in healthy ways. Do little things in your life to break out of that monotonous, low vibration daily routine. But just be kind to yourself. Don't be cruel. Find ways to recognize your stress and reduce your stress. Number 2, mindfully eat as much diverse, fresh, healthy, local, natural food as possible when you're hungry. What do you mean hungry, Heath? Well, at a scale of about 1 to 10, where 10 is absolutely starving and 1 is you're so stuffed you probably shouldn't have gotten that stuffed, eat about around an 8 or a 9. And generally not before you go to sleep. You want the body to really be recovering while you sleep and not being focused on digestion. Don't be scared of the body having hunger. You may be saying, yeah, but if I'm hungry, I'm going to be starving and then I'm just going to overeat. Well, here's an easy solution to that I once heard from the health ranger. Eat an apple before you eat your meal. That not only will you get the nutritional properties of the apple, but then you're going to be less likely to overeat during the meal. And I've tried it a few times. It definitely works. There are whole body functions that occur when fasting. Fasting for days or intermittent fasting is definitely a significant proactive wellness practice to many these days, but I'm not going to go deep into that here. I'd be happy to in a coaching session, but just don't be afraid of the body feeling hungry, getting to that point where it hasn't had something in a while. It's actually very, very healthy for your body. Mindful eating, what is that? It's a hard concept to understand. They say, take time in between bites. I like to look at it a different way that may resonate with you. Visualize yourself when you eat, even if you're alone, that you're at a dinner table with a celebrity or someone that you've always wanted to meet in your life. And not only are you trying to impress that celebrity or person, but there's paparazzi cameras all around you. And therefore you have to eat knowing that the camera is catching every move. And of course that you want to impress that celebrity. So how would you act if that's the case? Well, that essentially is mindful eating right there. You're not going to just keep shoveling food into your mouth and not take any time in between bites. You're going to mindfully move through that meal. Fresh, local, natural food, of course. That's why local honey is so important. Our body's immune systems then acclimate to the local pollen that's in that local honey and works on our seasonal allergies. So those who have seasonal allergies, try to switch over to local honey only and see how that affects it. Same with supplements. Just like you want fresh, whole foods, supplements need to be consisting of real, raw, dried plant or food concentrates. They can't be lab made. Cooking yourself. So this is all on eating, right? Like how do you do this? Cooking yourself. Don't eat out as often. Don't eat fast food. It's usually less cost too to do meal prep. And cooking, it's like going to a Grateful Dead concert. It's never the same twice. You don't have to play the same songs in the same way. You can keep creating different ways, cooking longer, cooking shorter, mixing with different spices, different cooking styles. I love exotic spices, and you can mix and match so much. Superfoods. Putting superfoods. This is one of what I have found to be a big secret, is try to load your meals with as much superfoods as possible. And sure, there's like super fancy, cool ones, unique ones out there like sea moss or moringa, or shilajit is a big new one, getting a lot of hubbub. But if you want to stay basic and again low cost, garlic, ginger, turmeric, cayenne pepper, basil, and Celtic sea salt are ones that you should be seasoning your food with as often as possible. Cayenne pepper is incredible for your blood, your capillaries. So incredible that it's said that you should carry, if you think you're at risk of a heart attack, that you should carry a small vial of cayenne pepper with you, or someone who's normally with you, a spouse or somebody, that if you ever do have a heart attack, it's been shown that you can put that into someone's tongue or put it under their nose, and it will cause a rapid, large, magnified expansion of the capillaries and blood vessels, and potentially save a heart attack or stroke. So very important to use cayenne pepper as much as you can. Minerals like magnesium, selenium. I'm including a link of foods that are high in selenium. Both of those are really effective against a lot of illnesses, and magnesium deficiency is actually one of the biggest deficiencies out there. So all low cost type of stuff. Number 3, move often and move well. All right, do some movement each day, something physical on some level. All right, don't get hung up on the duration or the intensity. Don't be hard on yourself. Just start by doing some movement each day. Sure, a lot of exercise goes into terms of cardio and strength training, but don't forget stretching. And I've heard trainers say that if you have to make a decision between exercise and stretching, to choose stretching. So you could stretch as often as possible, just general stretches. Stability ball stretches are incredible. Yoga poses. Do you ever notice animals, what they do right when they wake up, like cats or dogs? Take a look at the next time. It's the exact same stretch every day. And I should show you why stretching is so important. But choose an exercise plan that is best for your personal situation, fits into your existing lifestyle, especially if it's fun, if you can gamify it, align it with your hobbies and interests, like walking. Walking does not get enough attention because people are like, oh, it's just too simple. There's no way it can have that big of an impact. But I would say, hey, look at the populations of the big cities of this world, especially in Europe, and see how healthy people look when they are walking that often. I remember when I was living in London, I was walking 30 minutes each way to work, and I didn't have to do any other exercise. I felt in great shape. There's so much blood circulation that occurs when you walk, so much brain health that benefits. I once heard that walking for 45 minutes gives someone 80% of the cardio workout of a marathon runner. I mean, just that's how profound walking can be on someone's health. Big walking days can certainly suffice. Don't let anybody fool you. Dancing, great ways to do exercise, right? And even if you can't dance, go out and dance because of money, or maybe you're scared for one reason or another. Even if you can't even stand up and dance for whatever reason, dancing in your chair. Get down in your chair, move around, but do some movement. Swimming is the best movement in my mind. It's the #1 exercise out there. But you could even do movement-based gaming, virtual reality. I mentioned the stability ball, stretches, toning, sit-ups on the stability ball, or even just sitting on it while you watch TV or using it as a footrest, to me is #2 after swimming. It is the best pound-for-pound exercise device out there. The most impact for the least amount of effort, which I know what we're all trying to get to here in this top 10. With all movement, though, be mindful. And I'm going to give you a little trick here because you don't want to get hurt and you want the movement to give you the most value. So there's actually a study, a link I'll put in here about Western societies and back bending that showed that we bend our backs in a way that no one else in the world does. And therefore we put so much strain on our backs and end up hurting our backs so often, rather than just bending over at the hip and just picking something up in a very symmetrical way. So that's leading into these 3 S's when it comes to mindful movement. All right. Symmetry, strength, and centered core. You're like, what do you mean, Heath? Centered core? Centered starts with a C. You're like, yeah, it does. But it sounds like an S, and now you remembered it in a way where you're not going to forget it, all right? So symmetry, now our bodies, except for our organs, which are very strategically placed, our body is completely symmetrical. And therefore, any prolonged periods where we are out of symmetry will produce unwanted issues. You should always want to operate and move with symmetry. Strength, we are strong beings. So when moving, be your solid, grounded, capable body full of muscles and bones that are strong. Don't be tense. I'm not saying to move with tense movements, but solid movements. Be strong in your movements. And then centered core. We don't move with legs or arms. We don't grab things with arms. We don't turn to look at things with our neck. Everything starts with and ends with our core. So always be aware of and focus on your core as you do your movements. So when you're reaching in that garage to get that new tool, or you're in the pantry trying to reach way back to grab that food, be mindful, symmetrical, strong, and be aware of your core and how it's positioned during that movement. Number 4, drink the right amount of clean water throughout the day. Hey, get filters. I get these big refillable 5-gallon water jugs, and then I have those water, and it's a nice little exercise every month or two that I have to go get them refilled. But there's machines you can hook up right to your tap, get whatever, but really try to stay away from normal tap faucet water. These water jugs are not expensive. I think it's 40 cents a gallon. So about every month or two, it costs me about $10. So a very low cost way. Our bodies, our organs, our cells, I'm sure we've all heard this. We know how much we are primarily made up of water. It is incredible how much our body is water. Therefore, bringing in the right amount of water, the best water available, should be of utmost importance to us. And if you want, ideally put in some freshly squeezed lemons into that water and get some good energy there, or some kernels of sea salt like we mentioned for some extra hydration. Number 5, breath work. Look, at our core, we are only alive because we are breathing. Breathing fuels everything that's going on. When our brains don't get oxygen, we go into a coma very quickly. Brain dead, vegetable state, coma. And I mentioned that study of smokers just because they take time out of their day to breathe. So it doesn't matter how you do it, what you do it, or how often, how many breaths, just do some conscious breath work throughout the day. Number 6, rest and recover. The body works so hard, but it needs time to rest and recover. Obviously, the easy example is sleep, right? Like, it's always a mystery. Why do we need to sleep? Well, we have to. We have to have a recovery period. We're all so stressed out these days. We're so busy, right? I'm good. I'm just busy right now. Life's so busy. We need time to recover. So give yourself permission to take moments to relax. Take a day off from exercising if you need to, if you're feeling worn out, or a day off from working on that big project you've been putting so much time into. Take a nap if you feel like you need to take a nap. Recover as needed. I'm not saying be lazy. There is a very clear, defined line between being lazy and smartly giving your body time to recover. When it comes to sleep, I've heard consistency is the key as much as you can. Ideally 6 to 9 hours, but ultimately try to be consistent in the amount of time that you get for sleep. I've done testing and I have found that I need at least 6 hours. That anything less than 6 hours is going to be really tough for me. But if I get 6, I'm usually good. But more is better, of course. Number 7, receiving sunlight. Our bodies regulate better when we're in nature. And we talked about sunlight being so important to producing vitamin D, which orchestrates our immune systems. So there's many health benefits to receiving sunlight. Get direct sunlight each day if you can. And by direct, I mean with no sunblock. And yeah, that may be scary, especially me. Remember, this is coming from a guy who's had all these skin issues in the past. But don't get burnt. Even if it's just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of direct sunlight, as few as 8 to 15 minutes of exposure is enough to make plenty of vitamin D that for lighter skinned individuals. All right. And after that time frame, you also are at risk of getting burnt. So again, I'm not at all telling you to risk sun damage. Do not risk sun damage. Be smart. Be gradual with it. Think of it as getting sun kissed, right? That term gets used a lot. And be aware of your skin type to know if that needs to be adjusted forwards or backwards. But get some sunlight and get out in nature. I'm going to talk about earthing here, so I'm going to kind of combine it with number 10, earthing and grounding. Even if all you can do is listen to nature sounds for just a moment in your house or in your car or headphones at work. Spotify has them, the internet are full of them. It's amazing how much your mind can relax thinking you're surrounded by, streams and flowing wind and trees and birds singing. That is incredible for what our body's DNA is made up of. We grew up in nature. And as we talked about in number 1, it has a profound effect on our stress levels. There's also great YouTube videos out there too of drones that will go into these huge nature scenes, and you can go wherever you want. You can tour the Caribbean islands, you can tour the Amazon forest, whatever you want. At the wellness club, we had TVs on and offered VR teleportations. So you can put yourself into nature even if you're living in the smack middle of a city, which many of us are these days. Number 8, sleep with the windows open and or get as much fresh air as often as possible. Ventilation. Don't keep breathing the same air over and over. So if you're staying home because you're sick, okay, fine. Ventilate. Get fresh air through those lungs into the body. Help your body recover from that health issue. And especially when you're sleeping, even if it's chilly out, sleeping with your windows open, you can usually get by without the house getting super cold. You want to turn off the heat so it doesn't keep running all night. But get under your covers, get warm. But notice then, when you wake up, try one night and feel how better it is waking up after a night of breathing fresh, circulating air. Number 9, turning off all audible phone notifications. A lot to do with stress, but a lot to do with being mindful about where you put your time, what you tolerate, and keeping a stable energy level. Check your phone for new messages on your time, according to your specific situation and circumstances, with no stress or distractions in between. How many people head to their phones immediately after it beeps or buzzes with a notification, right? And even if you don't, even if you're like, oh yeah, I'm good, I don't check it right away. Well, you heard that beep, or your subconscious at least heard that beep. So there was at least a moment where you got distracted. And maybe even a bigger moment where you also thought, wow, I wonder who that was. Is that that guy or girl I was hoping was going to reach out to me? Or is that maybe my family member or a kid that could be in a tough situation? You got to figure out how much you want your life interrupted. And that's why I say the only audible notification should be phone. And you should tell the people you care about, hey, any emergency should never be handled through an asynchronous message. Try to call me. Try to get me live on that call. Or, if you're in the same area, come up and talk to me about an urgent situation. Because non-urgent notifications should not affect your life priorities or your ability to effectively take care of them. Choosing life priorities first, be conscious, be mindful, and align your decision making to that. And number 10, this is something I've really started to learn a lot more about, and I think it is one of the least known easy secrets to best health. Find time to connect to the earth. It's called earthing or grounding. Whether you're out in nature, whether you're just in your backyard, there's also grounding mats that you can plug into that use the grounding wire in our houses to produce a grounding effect. You can also put those on beds as well. And some of the biggest immediate impacts that are known are people waking up saying they just had the deepest night of sleep that they've had in a long time or maybe ever. But these researchers say that it's almost impossible for inflammation to exist in the body while you're grounded to the earth. The earth has this frequency that it resonates at. And of course, we evolving over the many years that we did evolve, were usually connected to the earth through bare feet and our living situations and hunting and fishing and everything else. So that's something we came to be accustomed to. Well, it's being reported that the earth produces profound healing properties. So even if you can just allocate 10 minutes a day, ideally 30 to 60 minutes a day if you can, just go sit in the chair, take off your shoes and socks and sit barefoot or stand or walk around. It is very, very impactful for a lot of different health conditions. I would recommend checking out the Earthing movie. There's also a book based on it as well. A lot of this, I mean, this is literally quote unquote discovered in the last 20 years. This is one of the newest health recommendations and discoveries of something that can be so simple and yet produce so profoundly healthy impacts for us. So there you go. That's my top 10 easiest ways, least impactful ways to your life, least costly ways to your wallet to live a very, very healthy life. So we've reached the end of this mammoth health and wellness podcast. It's been a huge one. I hope you have gained a lot from it. I put a lot into it, and I thank you for allowing me to share all of that. I'm just one person. I'm just trying to provide information to give you prompts to go much farther and be healthier. I can feel and know how it could seem overwhelming right now. Feel free to go back at any time, listen to certain sections, hear that info again. But you also may just want to consider letting it settle for a moment. You know, these adult Santa Claus effect moments, they don't happen immediately. They take time. Your body needs to reflect on it. Remember, you are the one. It's your intuition combined with your reason and intellect, but it's your intuition that ultimately produces changes in your life. That's where it comes from. It comes from within. It doesn't come from somebody telling you what to do. Everybody hates people telling them what to do. So make sure you understand why you continue to make the health decisions you do. And if you cannot step through it and feel aligned with it, then take another moment or as much time as you need to reconsider, re-research, rebreathe, whatever, and do not rush into anything. Remember that we got here today, we're all living without modern medicine. And as for you and your life, you've gotten where you are by surviving. All that's been thrown at you in your life, from stress to health conditions to job losses, you may have had a long journey and battled through a lot, divorces, kid issues. Maybe it was really, really hard, but you are still here. You have made it. You deserve credit for that. No matter where you're at, you can start fresh now. You can make fresh decisions now. You can make your life even better, as well as a better life for those who care for who you care about and who care about you. I'm going to attach a 1-minute motivational message to acknowledge where you've been and encourage you to keep going anytime you feel down, all right? You can watch that one. I'll put that in the show notes. But that's it for this one. Tune into our next 2 episodes. I only got 2 more planned. The next one being business and politics. The one after that, religion and relationships. On the next one about business and politics, something else very near and dear to my heart. We're going to cover topics about like America, you know, what it truly was and what it is now, our way of life, the original American visions and values, oppression through things like taxes. We're going to talk about business impact, businesses, levels of control in central banking systems being the most powerful engine and lever of control, politics, including adult Santa Claus effect moments on Donald Trump. You may be surprised there. Climate change, we're going to talk about that is essentially a political issue, even though it should not be a political issue. We should want to treat the planet friendly, but you may be surprised by what gets covered there. We'll talk about modern military setup, including the Ukraine conflict, because that's the one that is in the news the most. And yes, we are even going to briefly, boldly, and fearlessly take a look at the Q concept. And I know that one is something that a lot of people get scared of and want to stay away. They don't understand. Well, you may learn a lot about what we're going to cover when we go through the adult Santa Claus effect moment on that concept. So many more next episode, many more adult Santa Claus effects to come. I know there was a lot in this one. Bless you all for living the best life that you can and everything you're going to do from this point forward to live your absolute optimal, best and healthy life. If you like this podcast, please like and subscribe. Follow me, heath.zone, and my LinkedIn and Instagram channels linked there. Thank you for listening. And remember that you can go through the process of finding out Santa Claus isn't real now, or you can go through that process later. But the longer you wait, the harder it is going to be on you. Trust me and many others when I say the other side is so much more beautiful, so much more peaceful, and most of all, so much more healthy. Create yourself a terrific day.